Hello, and welcome back to the Library of Chaos podcast. I'm Wozni.
And I'm Obrium.
And I'm Jimbus.
And we're here today to read the Last Chances books. We're looking at the original set of Last Chances books, which includes the novel 13th Legion, short story Deliverance, and in the coming episodes we'll be talking about Kill Team, the short story Liberty, and the novel Annihilation Squad. These are all written by Gav Thorpe. Jimbus talked us into reading these, that they were relevant. So I kind of want to pass on to Jimbus and have him tell us a little bit about Gav Thorpe.
Of course, I get all the blame.
Yes.
Well, I deserve it.
Yes.
Gav Thorpe is...
Hang on a second.
First...
Very important.
Fuck's sakes.
Alright,
What?
I'm good.
Fuck that noise.
Alright. Business. We're here for business, so let's get down to business. Gav Thorpe is the first writer we are encountering who has never had any kind of literary career outside of Black Library prior to the publication of his first book. He worked for Games Workshop in its very early days. He was like one of the very first people to join the company back in the 80s when he was, I believe he was 19 years old at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And he made his name writing rules and fluff text, little snippets of text. He worked on an awful lot of games, and he was asked to write for the newly created Black Library, to be one of its first authors. Now, the very, very important thing to note here is this. Gav Thorpe had never been published at any point prior to this. He did not have an established literary track like William King or Dan Abnett. And as we go through these books, I think we will discover why that was the case.
I have to correct you very slightly. He had a single publication before Black Library, which was a short story in Inferno magazine, which became
is owned by Black Library.
Well, it was before it was Black Library, but wasn't it? I think
it was owned by Games Workshop, so
yes,
he's never been published.
Yes,
he was never published by an actual publisher.
Yeah,
is what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that sounds like a very harsh introduction, Jimbus.
Oh, we haven't said anything bad about him.
I mean, it's just the truth. I haven't.
I mean, for contrast, you say he's the first who doesn't have a literary career, but Dan Abnett had never written a novel before First and Only, which is an interesting comparison point.
He had been published before, and
with non-novels.
He certainly knew his way around
writing a story.
Yeah.
A plot.
Interesting characters.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm sure we'll discover what you meant by your introduction there, Jimbus, when we get there.
Well,
I'm sure we will.
Yes. Well, we've got. I mentioned before today we're going to be looking at the novel Kill Team and the short story Liberty. What do we have that we want to say about that before we go into spoilers?
Well, should someone give a basic plot synopsis of 13th Legion?
No, that comes after spoilers. Okay, well, I guess...
What do you mean?
Sorry, a synopsis, I guess? Sorry, I'm thinking a summary. You're right, a synopsis. It is about Cage, who is a guy in a penal legion. I think he's a fresh... What's his rank again? Lieutenant.
He's definitely not a... Yeah, he's a lieutenant. He's definitely not a fresh recruit to the Legion, at least. He's made it to lieutenant.
Yes. Well, it's like first paragraph, practically. He becomes a lieutenant.
Judging from the timeline, I think he's been with them about 1.5 years, maybe, at that point. It's
about Cage being part of a penal legion and sort of navigating that, I want to say. And... yeah, it's about a guy in a penal legion, and it's really hard to
do this introduction.
Well, it's really hard to go further than that without going into a plot, I feel like.
Maybe. I mean, I can do a better introduction if you want me to. I was going to include about what Gav Thorpe had to say about it himself.
Okay.
Well, since you have the introduction paragraph.
Okay.
So we're going to start with 13th Legion. 13th Legion, I guess, is an introduction to Cage's character and how he fits into the penal legion. We see him as a lieutenant. He's probably a relatively young lieutenant, considering he only seems to have been with them for about 1.5 years at the time we're starting our story. Gav Thorpe himself suggests this book is almost a collection of shorter stories with a novella, I think he says.
Yeah, and it kind of is in a similar way to Gaunt's Ghost's First and Only. There's a lot of parallels you can draw between like the structure of the book, I think, and what, like, it's a guard book where we see a bunch of people in the guard go through a bunch of different scenarios that sort of piece together into a larger narrative.
Yes, no, I think you could probably say that. Although where Dan Abnett tended to work on a lot of different characters, while Gav Thorpe does seem to introduce a bunch of characters,
it's very focused on Cage himself, rather than a... Yeah.
It's always from Cage's perspective. We're always seeing what he thinks of the people. I mean, in terms of what we were talking about with our last episodes about the Space Wolves, if we had any sort of inkling that Ragnar might have been an unreliable narrator, then Cage is absolutely an unreliable narrator. There's so many scenarios where you sort of think, is this really what that person is intending, or is this really what they're thinking, or what they're planning to do, or is this just what Cage believes that they're planning to do?
Oh yeah, it's all written in first person as well.
Yes.
Which is hard to do. I don't know if I'd say he pulls it off. It occurs to me, there are a few things worth talking about from like Gav's own, what's the word? The preamble into the book. In the 20th anniversary edition I read. He has in the foreword, I mentioned already, the way he described this book felt very, like, strangely familiar to the Gaunt's Ghost book. Like, you could take half of what he wrote and put it in front of First and Only, and it would fit and make perfect sense. It's like, oh, it's a collection of stories. One of them came from something I wrote in Inferno magazine before, and so on and so on. I think that's where the similarities end, other than it being about the Imperial Guard. He mentions a few things that are interesting. One of them is that one of the working titles was Crimes Against Mankind, which I think would have been an appropriate title for this book. He also mentioned...
This is what I mean. This is what I mean. You're being very harsh. Are you suggesting that this book is a crime against humanity, wasn't he?
Yes. Yes, I am. I'm also going to suggest that Dennis the Mechanical Hamster is in fact the real author, because that is much kinder on Gav Thorpe, who, by all accounts, seems like a very nice and wholesome person, and I'm going to say bad things about his work.
Let me now just say this. We are going to tear Gav Thorpe a new asshole over the course of these couple of episodes. So, before we start laying into him thick and heavy, we don't know Gav Thorpe, we cannot judge him, we are purely judging him based on the quality of his writing. And his writing, to quote the great fictional movie reviewer Jay Sherman, it stinks!
Yes. He mentioned he used to have an author's bio, which claimed that Dennis the Mechanical Hamster wrote the books and Gav Thorpe took credit for them. And, like, I don't know. It's almost like it's taken all the fun out of a joke which wrote itself by him taking
Can we just...
I've got one other thing to say.
Oh.
The endorsement on the front page of the book read that... Thorpe writes strong, uncluttered narrative, and his characters actually sound like real people. How do we feel about that?
If in a sense they mean that they don't speak like they're edited, maybe.
Okay, look, they're certainly not. The narratives, they're fairly uncluttered. I can give them that. Oh my, okay, look, this book is. These books are not well written, and I don't mean that in a like.
Look, once we get into spoilers, can we just get into spoilers? Can we throw
before we do that, we can talk about
a new one?
We can talk about the way he writes. So it's very this is his first book he's ever written, and it shows. It's not like Abnett's where it's like he's somehow out of the gate. The first ever like full novel is like a masterpiece that I would recommend to anyone. Right? It's not that. It shows. There's grammar errors. There's a lot of like writing faux pas that are just, is that correct plural? Just commit all over the place.
It's quite trope heavy.
He doesn't know how to characterize people. Like a lot of the characters in this just feel like mannequins with a name tag on them. They don't have a personality. They're not memorable. I can remember something about like maybe 4 characters. Let's go 5 characters from the first book, and there's definitely more in there.
Before we get into anything else, though, and definitely before we start spoilers, I have something to say.
Oh.
And that is, I actually like this first book.
Oh my god.
I think you're both wrong.
Oh,
I mean, I have nothing to say about the second and the third one. We'll get to that when we get to it. But I actually like the first one. I think it stands alone as a very
this is going to be interesting.
Oh no.
Fun times.
There's a lot of what's wrong with it is the way it's written, not what's in there. I feel like that's one thing I'll say. There are things that are in there. That's not entirely. There's a difference between how something is written and what they are trying to write. If that makes sense.
You've just got to think, wasn't it, that this story is written by an illiterate person who joined the 13th Legion. So you see, it's from Cage's perspective, and clearly it's written by Cage.
I could believe that. his I've had Black Library
now.
I've had Black Library books that I have complained about and I have disliked, including some by Gav Thorpe, and like. Before I've been like, well, these two are kind of competing for the worst Black Library book I've read. And that discussion has been put to rest now, in my opinion, after reading this set of books. They don't read like bad literature. They read like fan fiction. And
do you think that any of the problem that you have with the first book when you reread them was that you knew what was coming in the second and third book? So you couldn't.
I didn't know what was coming. I cannot say that. I did not know what was coming in the second and third book.
Did you not read them before?
No, I've never read these before.
Okay, so you were like me then, similarly reading it as a.
This is my. It blinded on these, and these were they were worse than I could have possibly expected. They were like fan fiction. Gav has definitely improved as a writer since then. I still do not like his writing, but he's far better now than he used to be. So biggest improver award. Happy days. Get a banana sticker for that, Gav. There's just so much. There's just, I feel like I can talk about it, but it'll be easier to talk about with examples, but there's a lot of things like how people are characterized. There's really awkward, use of, clunky use of adjectives. Sometimes it'll feel like in a passage of text, he'll have this idea of, here's how I'm supposed to write something like that. And you'll see a pattern that repeats itself, but not in an effective repetition way, more like a really clunky, why does this sentence read like that one? Why does this one read like that one?
There are definitely some, I'd say, some examples of that later on, at least, that I noticed, where it feels like something is written in a way because that is how he's seen it written before, and it just has to be written that way. It's sort of like he's got this pattern sort of in his head, and he's like, well, when you're writing about this thing, you have to say X, you have to say Y, and it has to be done in Z way. And he'll go through that pattern, and you can almost feel it coming out in the way it's written.
Another thing I've noticed he's really bad at actually communicating ideas to the reader. Quite often, if he wants to communicate something to the reader, one character will suddenly be out of nowhere, a discussion will start up where one character is a wise expert who can teach on the matter, and then another character becomes the dumbest motherfucker you've ever seen, and it gets explained to the point that he would understand it, and then it gets explained a bit further than that, beyond what any person with half a brain would need explained to them. You'd be like, oh, I get it, and then the person still doesn't get it, and it just gets explained a bit more. It feels very, insulting as the reader.
Yeah, that person is usually Cage. Which is a bit awkward because our main character, who we are seeing through the eyes of, is both a tactical, competent leader. He is incredibly competent in lots of other fields, and then also beyond
dumber than
stupid.
You could possibly imagine.
Yeah,
someone being,
whenever in conversations about
a basic
certain topics.
concept needs to be explained to you. It's not just
even just basic stuff. Yeah. Often because he's our main character, so he's gonna be in every conversation because that's how we see the world, right?
Yeah. He's also very edgy, which is often not. It's not as much of an issue in the first book, but it still is an issue.
Our introduction to Cage is him beating a man to death with his bare hands.
No, not to death.
Well,
yes.
he's trying to beat him to death.
Yes, and it's written awfully.
Cage is Cold Steel. He is the Cold Steel of Warhammer 40,000.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
So could you explain that reference for us, Jimbo?
Cold Steel? Are you not aware of Cold Steel the Hedgehog?
It's one of the most infamous things. We're really off track.
You know what? Anybody can Google it. I'm pretty sure you are the only person on Earth at this point who hasn't heard of Cold Steel the Hedgehog, and that our audience will not need to look him up.
All
Anyway.
right, well, fine. Good for them.
The problem there, Wozni, is you imply we actually have an audience.
Okay, that's very true.
I mean, I'm
true.
pretty sure like at least
Oh.
half of the views on the podcast are me. So
Oh, we'll lose half of them now by shitting on some books. So there we go.
Or Gav Thorpe angry fanboys.
Oh, they do exist. Well, that's something. I was going to say.
They do exist.
So why do they exist is an interesting concept. I've compared this to fan fiction, and I think that is the strongest thing I could compare against, which is fan fiction exists because people read fan fiction. There are people out there who read fan fiction and don't, have the aversion like you would. They don't view it and go, ew, this is fan fiction quality. They read it and enjoy it. And I feel like somebody who reads Gav Thorpe work and enjoys it is much the same. They don't really discern quality from it, or lack thereof. They just enjoy it regardless of that. Much like someone reading fan fiction.
Have you never read any fan fiction, Wozni? Do you not read sci-fi fan fiction at all, or anything like that?
I don't read a lot of fan fiction. Mostly when I see fan fiction, it's in the context of it being poor quality. And this is what I'm comparing this against.
Here's the thing, and you're going to have to cut all this out. I have written a lot of fan fiction down the years, purely as a distraction from academic stuff. I've written Warhammer 40,000 fan fiction, and I'd like to think the stuff I've written is actually better than anything that Gav Thorpe has done. Though it probably is worse.
I've seen short stories you've written that were definitely better written than these books.
And I'm pretty sure those are shitposts.
I feel like if you're going to make a statement like that, right, you're going to have to post it. You're going to have to post it for evidence.
Yeah, we can discuss the terms of that later.
Making a statement like I write
my Primarch's daughter's fan fiction.
Making a statement like I write fan fiction.
I don't want anyone to see that shit.
Making a statement like I write fan fiction that's better than one of the most successful Black Library authors, like novels, is kind of a big statement.
Generally, okay, on the face of it, what you said sounds like it makes sense. But actually, in this case, it's not that big a statement. At the very least, better than the Last Chances books, which do read like bad fan fiction. You can tell it's the first books he's written. Sorry, Gav, your books are better now. We'll talk about problems with your later books when we get to them, but they're better than these.
The interesting thing is, though, as I said, though, I think most of the sort of the literary problems just kind of I don't have an issue with them because it feels like it's being written from Cage's perspective. And it feels like it's almost being written by Cage. For if he was writing stuff that was, say, for Horus Heresy or something, I feel like that's when you'd actually have a problem. Because if he's writing in anything other than first person and he's not writing from the perspective of somebody, then I imagine the writing would be more obvious.
We can go into some detail of examples in a minute. Do we have any other theories on why people like reading this, though?
Well, I mean, as I said, I quite like the first one.
Long-running theory, but you're going to have to give me some time to explain this one.
Go for it. Oh, well, this is based on stuff he's got on his foreword, isn't it? Other things.
Yes, this is based on stuff in his foreword. In his foreword, Gav Thorpe spoke about one of his biggest influences being the works of Sven Hassel. Now, Sven Hassel, his whole story is incredibly convoluted and complex. He claims to have been a member of an SS penal battalion on the Eastern Front in World War II. Some of his detractors claimed that he was actually a petty criminal who got all his stories from a Danish prostitute. But Hassel's books on there's a whole... We don't have the time to go into the story of Sven Hassel, but basically his books created an entire genre, mostly in Britain, called Nazi exploitation. These are books that were basically there to showcase Nazi Germany and the Nazis. Some of the more infamous examples of this in the film terms was Ilse, She-Wolf of the SS. But in terms of books, the works of Sven Hassel, Leo Kessler, and a whole bunch of others were incredibly popular in the United Kingdom in the 1970s and the 1980s. Hassel's books sold 15 million copies in Britain alone, and his influence on war fiction was immense. In his books, one of my favourite writers described them as books of camaraderie, hunger, cold, loathsome authority figures, and the constant threat of sudden death. In Hassel's books, violence rumbled on as remorselessly as in a shoot-'em-up computer game, broken only by long, rambling tales related by a character named Tiny, in a Cockney style not dissimilar to their Maggot Malone. They were shaggy dog stories, basically.
So a lot of that does sound very, very familiar to
The constant
anyone who will have
threat
read
of
the Last
sudden
Chances books. The problem is, though, like surely a large part of those, like you said, hunger, cold, vile authority figures, all of those are also applicable to most Imperial Guard books, I would imagine.
Yeah,
Although probably
they
not.
are.
They
quite in
are,
the
but
same
there is a
way
very
that-
specific way these Nazi exploitation books are written. They are, again, written in such a way as... In the Nazi exploitation books, people are killing people for the hell of it. They're not killing people for some grand scheme. Maybe some authority figure is claiming you're killing foes to serve the Fuhrer, or in the case of this book, serve the Emperor. But to the soldiers on the ground, that doesn't matter. Who gives a... What has the Emperor ever done for them?
Basically,
They're just killing for the hell of it.
when either side in a confrontation is Nazis, you can justify one character doing whatever you want to another character without ethical qualms, is the gist of it.
Exactly. And the simple fact is, this book is written at a time when Imperium basically being space Nazis with a bunch of other stuff added on was very much in the forefront. Now, Games Workshop have drifted a long way from that by this point, but when Gav Thorpe is writing this, the Imperium is meant to be evil space Nazi Germany. These characters are not good guys. You're not supposed... They're all horrible, horrible people, which is very apparent in these books.
I mean, it almost plays both sides of that, though, doesn't it? Because on the one hand, you've got the Imperial Guard, who are like part of a ruthless regime, and they're expected to just follow their orders and such. And on the other hand, they can also do whatever they want to the other side, because they are like almost objectively evil. Yeah, because they're worshipping
chaos. Are chaos and traitors, or aliens, depending on the story. But
so you're almost playing both sides. You're playing both sides of a Nazi exploitation paradigm there.
Yeah, this is way too horrifyingly accurate. I don't like this. I don't like this comparison because it is disturbing.
Well, the truth is literally, I have read a lot of Nazi exploitation books for various history works I've done, and the parallels are fascinating. It is very clear that Gav Thorpe basically built his career, his success. This book sold well. He made a lot of money from it. He made a whole career off it. He made a whole career of basically taking Nazi exploitation, filing off the Nazi, replacing it with Imperium, and selling it to people.
Well,
I guess now we should talk about
the Nazi bit is filed
story.
off, though, so that's nice.
I mean, I think you're spot on though, because Cage is basically. I mean, something I was going to talk a bit about later is that Cage feels like a vessel for Gav to basically put him in any situation that, and then have Cage react in a way that Gav finds amusing or interesting, or I don't know. I don't know, to be honest. At some point, I started to consider whether he was getting off on it, and it was kind of disturbing.
Yeah. I think
that's a conversation we're going to have in later books, because later books have left me with questions about Gav Thorpe that I really kind of don't want to have answered.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's probably enough of discussing these books. I've given a lot of points about things I think are bad about the writing, and I've given them in very brief terms. We can go into more discussion about them, more specifics as we talk about spoilers. So
I think it'll be a lot easier with actual examples.
Yeah. So shall we go into spoilers? Okay, Avram, why don't you tell us about 13th Legion?
Well, I guess to go from the beginning, we start off with an introduction to the 40k world. Could you briefly give an idea of when this was in terms of publishing dates compared to everything else?
This was very close after First and Only and Space Wolf. This is in the year 2000, I think. It's either 1999 or 2000.
It's a very early book in the sort of 40k library.
Yes.
Okay, so it starts off with an introduction to the 40k world. We see an introduction of what the penal legions are treated as by the guards, how they fit in. Just an idea before we then get introduced to the characters who are in the penal legion. We find out immediately that our main character is a very good fighter. And that will be something that is continued throughout all of the series. Did you have something to say, Joe?
We find out our main character is an edgelord because we are introduced to him beating the shit out of someone.
Well, okay, you guys have missed the thing immediately before that. It starts with the B plot. The B plot which keeps running on in the background and we keep coming back to be reminded it exists. That we don't know how it links in.
I forgot all about that.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about that? Do we want to go scene by scene first, or do we want to? Well, hang on. Do we want to start scene by scene? Because I do want to look at that scene, as do you. But do we want to go scene by scene, or do we want to talk about what happened in the story in general terms first?
I think the problem I was having when I was just trying to formulate like a sort of an overview is that this book is made up of a ton of short stories. So without going, this is a story about this is a story about this, and this is a story about this, and just basically just stating, what these little short stories make up. It's very difficult to give an overview of the story. I think going scene by scene for at least this one might be a good idea.
Okay. I might give a very brief try at like an overarching plot.
Okay.
Which is that we follow while this B plot kind of happens and we tie back into it way later. It follows Cage and his legion as they get whittled down through various different like mini adventures and mishaps. And then at the end, it turns out we were actually... The reason we haven't had more recruits is that we've been whittling you down on purpose to get to a small crack team who can do the best out of any team we could possibly get. And we're going to use you for a small covert mission. And then they do a small covert mission.
He's been distilling the 4,000 troops of the Last Chances down into a team that would be capable of covert ops. Yeah. It's an interesting idea, I guess.
It's one of the most inefficient methods you can possibly imagine, which is absolutely perfect for the Imperial Guard.
Yeah,
he drops them all in a pachinko machine and takes the ones that land in the right bucket, basically.
Basically. It's almost as random.
With that in mind, should we go scene by scene?
Yeah, I guess we can. I assume the beginning is you're talking about the scene that is not given from Cage's perspective. Correct. One of the very few scenes we have.
Yes, so I think it's every chapter. You get a long chapter, you get a small little like 1 or 2 page thing, which is telling giving us a little bit of a view on something that's happening somewhere else. And then you have a long chapter in first person perspective from Cage. Then you get a little scene like what's happening somewhere else, another proper chapter of Cage. That's the structure of the book. And of course, it does link up later. So at the start of this book, though, I started reading this book, okay? And I looked at it, and the very first paragraph, I read it, and I was like, this is going to be painful.
That was my feeling too.
This is the objective soup that you were talking about.
Yes, I showed this to a very good friend of mine who's very enthusiastic about literature, and she looked at it, and just immediately just replied, "It's adjective soup." It's
yes. Every noun has to have an adjective to describe it,
or multiple, and it's clunky.
Or multiple
bad use of adjectives as well, I might say. It's.
Do you want to read it?
I'm gonna read this out. Okay. The chamber hummed and vibrated with energy that coursed along the thick cable snaking across the low ceiling. There's no comma there. Something about... I can't tell... I'm not entirely sure what it is. Something about that reads wrong. The chamber hummed and vibrated with energy that coursed along the thick cable snaking across the low ceiling. It runs on. Then we have somewhere in the distance could be heard...
Thing and thing. That's the thing. It's like the chamber hummed and vibrated with energy that coursed thick, snake, low ceiling. It's incredibly clunky. It reads like something a kid would write.
Somewhere in the distance could be heard the steady thump, thump, thump of heavy machinery in operation. This is probably the best sentence in this entire passage. A nice little bit of onomatopoeia. We then have glow globes set at meter intervals around the metal walls of the square room illuminated the scene with a fitful, jaundiced light. Which is a sentence that I've read it as it says it there, not in the way you might expect to read it. It's missing a comma separating primary and secondary clause. I'm also going to point out the adjectives. Metal walls. Square room. Fitful, jaundiced light. It's like he felt like the first two were too dumb, too simple, and he tried to overcompensate with the light being fitful and jaundiced. Then we have, with a creak, the lock wheel on the door spans slowly. Sorry, hang on. With a creak, the lock wheel on the door spans slowly. It's missing a comma, separating primary and secondary clause. Thick metal bars to either side of the portal ground through their rusted brackets. It's like the first 4 sentences, the first one runs on, the third and fourth ones are missing commas where they should be separating clauses. And
but
like, even if you don't consciously
he's used a semicolon. Do you not understand his mastery of the English?
The semicolon's that semicolon is in a perfectly fine place. I won't begrudge him that.
Look at it. It's used correctly. At
the
least.
Semicolon is used correctly, but it should say with a creak, comma, the lock wheel on the door spans slowly. The primary clause is the lock wheel on the door spans slowly. The secondary is with a creak. This sounds pedantic, and you might read it and it might feel a bit off, but you might not know why. And that's the thing. Like to quote the great Mike Stoklasa, you might not have noticed it, but your brain did. If you don't use commas right.
Yes. Something I was going to point out, jaundice is a medical term. It's a yellowing. It comes with disease.
Yeah.
So fitful and jaundiced are basically the opposite of one another.
Well, no, I imagine fitful,
you're not really going to...
It just means yellow.
You can't be fitful and be jaundiced at the same time.
Fitful,
jaundice is an illness. How can you be fitful and jaundiced at the same time?
A flicking yellow light would be a fitful jaundiced light.
Yeah, I imagine fitful like it's flickering.
I know. The thing is, when I say
but you are right. It's a bit
like
weird.
The halogen. It's a halogen bulb, like a yellow halogen. Like is it yellow? No, what the fuck are those lights? The strip lights.
I know what you mean.
Here's the thing. What the guy who wrote Doom Repercussions of Evil, the lights flickered and sparkled in the air, that reads better than whatever the hell that was.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. This reads awful.
Doom Repercussions of Evil.
Well, just having the 2 adjectives there is clunky as fuck. But like I think they do work together. Like I don't think it's not that they don't work. It's just there's too many of them, and unnecessary as well.
The door swung open and a figure stepped inside, swathed in a long black greatcoat, the tall collar obscuring his face. As he paced into the light, his thin face caught the yellow glow, giving him a sickly pallor. His dark eyes glanced back over his shoulder before he took another step forward, easing the door closed behind him. Very edgy. This isn't Cage, but he's still very edgy. He has a nice black greatcoat, his dark eyes, his sickly pallor.
I mean, Cage is not the only edgy character in this by far. Like,
oh no,
the Colonel, is that the Colonel? I can't remember.
Colonel Schaeffer.
We'll get
That's
to
supposed to
him.
be Colonel Schaeffer, right?
No, that's not. That's the Inquisitor.
Oh, that's the Inquisitor. Okay.
Yeah, okay. So the B plot of this...
We don't see him for a long time.
The B plot of this is an Inquisitor who's like, this thing has gotten out. Oh no. And then he's running around hunting something, and later on we catch up with him. Yeah. So
that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
So, that first scene, it's like... It's just awful. Adjective soup, doesn't know how to use commas, run-on sentences, weird use of adjectives, a strange mix of like... words a 5-year-old would use to describe something and words a doctor would use to describe a patient. Like, fitful and jaundiced are fine, but it's just like, there is no tone that it conforms to, other than bad fan fiction.
And then, shortly after, we get to the first full sentence, which I'd like to read out, because I've been staring at it for the last couple of minutes, and it's bugging me.
Yes.
Raising the device to his lips, the man spoke. For a day of epistles, I have returned to the status generator, which appears to have malfunctioned. The specimen has escaped. I will start immediate investigations to recover or eliminate it. I pray to the Emperor that I can recapture the monster. This mistake could cost us dearly.
So I'm going to read it the way I imagine it. Is that epistles? Is that how that's pronounced?
Yeah. Oh. Euphistles. Euphistles. God, it's even worse.
Euphistes.
Euphistes. Okay. Third day of Euphistes. I see. Isn't it ISTLES? Euphistes? Is that supposed to be Euphistes? Third day of Euphistes. I have returned to the stasis generator, which appears to have malfunctioned. The specimen has escaped. I will start immediate investigations to recover or eliminate it. I pray to the Emperor that I can recapture the monster. This mistake could cost us dearly. Do you know what that sounds like? It sounds like if you're playing a video game and you walk into an area and you I'm thinking of like Amnesia or Soma. You walk into an area and you hear like a little like, oh, here's what somebody was saying at some point in the past.
it's a
in a
note
memory.
to explain plot.
Or or like you hit the button on the wall and say, "Man, here something somebody was saying in the past." Yeah.
Yeah, this is like fractionally better than having him just state this to himself, right? At least he's in this scene. He's recording this for
he's
either
recording
himself
this so a video
or
game
someone else's
protagonist can
prosperity.
come along further down the line
Yes,
and pick this
exactly.
up and press the button and hear this note that was recorded by somebody later to be discovered in the video game.
Yes. I agree. But in this case, he's recording it so that we understand what the fuck's happening.
Yes.
Immediately
Immediately after that,
it's clunky as fuck. I wrote it's clunky, but not the worst. It is clunky. And
immediately
I don't
after
agree
that, we
it's
have something that is very clunky, and it's possibly the worst description of fighting I have read in 40k. Like man-to-man fighting.
Does that include the rest of this? Series?
Yeah, I think it does.
You think this is the worst fight scene in the entire thing?
The worst described fight scene. Unless, of course, another one is worse described and I had just become acclimatized to it and didn't notice.
Okay, we'll get to one later that I absolutely despise, and it's for many reasons, but one of it is how it's described.
Okay, so the guardsman's nose explodes with blood as my fist crashes between his eyes. Next,
I will say we can't read the entire book. Like,
oh, we're not.
People should read this, if only just so that they can understand our pain.
Next, I hit him with a left to the chin.
No, Wozni, if you're going to read this, you need to read it in the edgiest voice possible.
Okay.
The guardsman's nose exploded with blood as my fist crashed between his eyes. Next, I hit him with a left to the chin, knocking him backwards a step. He ducks out in the next punch, spitting blood from cracked lips. My nose is filled with the smell of old sweat and fresh blood, and perspiration from the blazing sun trickles down my face and throat. All around I hear chanting and cheering. "Fragging kidness, fragging neck!" I recognize Jorah's voice. "Purpose of an orc apart!" Franks yells. The guardsmen from Jorah are cheering their men on, too, their flushed faces looking dark in contrast to their white and grey camouflage jackets and leggings.
We've gone far enough. Enough. But,
I think
that line, the second line there, really, that's the biggest one. Next, I hit him with a left to the chin, knocking him backwards a step. It's so methodical and...
Yeah, it's very reminiscent of the Sherlock Holmes movie, where Robert Downey Jr. is describing how he's going to take this guy apart.
Yes. But it's not like a methodical character. It's the dumbest motherfucker.
That's the thing, though, right? Because Cage always fights like this. This is how every
I hit him
fight...
with a left to the chin.
Yeah, it's almost like
backwards a step.
Cage is not like that with almost everything else, but whenever he fights, it is very much like this is Cage's kind of thing. He drops into this style of description, and I don't know whether it's just Kime writing action or whether it's how he wants Cage to come across. But Cage always fights like this.
Okay, yeah.
You sound defeated already.
I am.
And this is the first scene.
This is literally the first paragraph of the book is full of grammar errors and reads like ass, and then you get past this intro thing, and you get the first paragraph of Cage first person describing the rest of the book, and it also reads like ass. It's not good.
So I mean, this is a fight. This is to start off. Obviously, he's just showing us that Cage is a fighter, and that he's good at it. It's
basically completely inconsequential after that, though. Who's
that's literally.
Doesn't
my
matter.
God! You think about inconsequential fight scenes? We'll get to that later. But this
isn't even a fight that was. It's not even it barely even counts as part of a plot. Who's he hitting? Could you tell me if you weren't reading it?
Some sergeant.
Oh, you're thinking of Cronin, aren't you?
I'm not sure. He fights so many people in every book that it's basically impossible to keep track of why or who or what he's fighting.
Oh, he's just some guy from another guard regiment.
Yeah, from the Corrick guys, apparently.
Yeah. Whatever.
Was this I don't even remember the context of this. Yeah.
Colonel Sheffer walks in, and then we get to see how badass Colonel Sheffer is. Colonel Sheffer is Cage is built up of his massive edgelord. And it's is it correct to compare it to a Wolf effect? Cage is built up as a badass so that we can then contrast Sheffer against him to make Sheffer even more badass. It's not quite the Wolf effect, but you can see the comparison I'm making.
Here's the thing.
Is it not Schaefer?
There's a fun thing. Some say Schaefer, some say Schiffer. I ended up calling him Sheffield when I was reading it.
Okay, well, we don't want to know. You don't want to know what the text-to-speech kept reading it as, so...
You knew... Oh, my God. So
What are the feeders?
what's how do you pronounce it for Arnie's character in Predator?
It's almost certainly. I'm pretty sure it's Schaefer.
Schaefer. Okay. Yeah, because he's like named after him, even though he's nothing like him in any
Let's
way.
be honest, given that Gav Thorpe is British, he totally would have called him Schiffer, because just like the British have lieutenant and the Yanks have lieutenant,
I'll try and call him
Schiffer and the Yanks have Schiffer.
Am I not British?
He's supposed to be named after Arnie's character, I think, in Predator. So we'll go with Schaefer. I'll try and remember that. So he's described as like, he's almost like, the one thing Cage is lacking from Cold Steel is that Cage has like emotions. He runs hot, and then Schaefer in comparison runs cold. He's like the Terminator. He's like a merciless machine. He's like, this guy's barely even human. He's so badass, and
he is the
describes his cold eyes. He's just merciless.
Here's the thing: don't forget the Terminator. Arnie Schaefer. Let's be honest, if you're trying to write Arnold Schwarzenegger as a character in a book, you're a bad writer, wouldn't that basically be him?
Yeah, that's exactly it. He's trying to write, he's gotten Predator and the Terminator confused.
Oh, absolutely. But the other thing I'm going to add in here is that Schaefer, his character, again, drawn from Nazi exploitation, he's your stereotype of the cold SS officer.
Leader. Yeah.
He's basically who's based on Reinhard Heydrich, the man with the iron heart, one of the most horrifying figures in all history, to be bluntly honest. So, Schaefer is absolutely, I mean...
But here's the thing, he's not. Here's the thing I have to say, he's not. Cage constantly tells us that he is. But then he's a sadist. He doesn't tolerate anything at all. But he lets Cage get away with so much. Cage will ask annoying questions, and Schaefer will indulge him time and time again. He will indulge Cage's fucking behavior,
and he will act in one hand. In one scene, he'll be like, "Cage, I'm going to shoot you if you don't go and take this bottle out of the fridge or something." And then in the next scene, Cage will be doing the most ridiculous bullshit, and Colonel Schaefer will be like,
Schaefer would be like, what are you doing here, Cage?
For that.
He'd be like, Cage, you're not supposed to be here. Why are you here? And Cage would be like, sorry, sir, I just, bad excuse.
Supposed to be beating all these men to death?
Yeah, it's like...
that actually is surprisingly common in Nazi exploitation. Sorry, that's extremely common in these Nazi exploitation books. You have the cold commanding SS officer, but then he will basically indulge the protagonist and let them do whatever the fuck they want to the Russians or anything, and they'll just let them do it.
To the Russians, it's just general sloppiness.
Yeah.
Oh, can I please use? I think this is the perfect point to quote to point out the quote that is at the beginning of the author's introduction, which is, "If you steal from one author, it's plagiarism. If you steal from many, it's research." So that is literally quoted at the beginning of this book.
Yes, but here's the thing. It can be research if you are able to use it to create something new. An alloy. If you use it sloppily, if you slap all of these bits from various things, if you just slap in Arnie from Predator / the Terminator and don't bother to disguise him or build upon him or add anything to, or even actually give him a character beyond, this is something I've seen in a movie, well, as you can see, it's incredibly apparent, incredibly poor, and doesn't make for good reading.
Yeah, and our first introduction of Colonel Schaefer is basically what we're going to get from most of the plot, at least on the right
Correction,
hand.
It's what we're going to get from all of the plot.
Well, as I said, there's two parts to Colonel Schaefer. One is where he's constantly insulting Cage, he's constantly belittling him, he's constantly
reminding him that he's in charge. He's the authoritarian figure who's cold and merciless. Yeah.
Yes, and then on the other hand, we'll see a different Colonel Schaefer entirely. But this is the hard, cold. You don't deserve to live, guardsman. You're a prisoner. You're not even a guardsman in this case. It's you're a worm, basically, to be ground beneath the heels of Colonel Schaefer and his weird Last Chances Battalion.
So we have a bunch of other characters introduced in this scene. We've got the guy who's his friend, whose name I don't remember. A lot of these characters, they have this is the character who does this, and then they don't have an actual personality. So they're just they're like mannequins. They're like mannequins with a name tag that says, "Hi, my name is Joe. This is my job." On them, So they've got Cronin. Cronin is the guy who was touched. Go on.
He will give them like one quirk,
Yes.
which is supposed to cover for a character.
Yeah, so Cronin is
Did
his
this come out
quirk.
after? Did this come out after Abnet's and the Abnet?
It came out after First and Only, I think.
It's almost like he read that and went.
Both First and Only, and it also came out after,
Space
I
Wolf?
believe, Space Wolf.
I think so.
I mean, I'm sure
Around the
a
same
lot
time,
of
though.
books. He could have got this from a lot of things.
Here's
but,
the thing I will also say, because Gav Thorpe was working in-house, I do not doubt for a second that he didn't proofread the initial versions of both Space Wolf and probably First and Only. He probably read them and was inspired by them in his own writing. Because you can see a number of stuff where he's like, oh, William King's got a good idea, I'm going to borrow it. Oh, Dan Emmett's got a good idea, I'm going to borrow it.
It does very much feel like when he starts introducing the characters that...
Well, here's the thing, he can borrow ideas without necessarily executing them well.
I don't remember any good ideas he borrowed.
I feel like it felt like he did have the idea of, like, well, in the sense that when you start introducing the characters, you're going to have every character is going to have a quirk, as you said, or every character is going to have a specific trait or a skill in this case as well. Sometimes we also missed the best and edgiest line from Colonel Schaefer's introduction, which is he is always in silhouette when you first see him. It's like he has a talent.
Yeah, it mentions like as if his talent is to like have a cinematic introduction where the sun's rising right behind him or something. Like,
Well, here's the thing: this is basically Gav Thorpe writing what he. Imagine this in audio visual form. Imagine this as a film. He's basically writing a sort of a film script in prose form. It's like those. You ever read some of the tie-in fiction to like films? Like there's a tie-in book version of, say, the various Star Wars movies. There's a lot of those. This kind of reminds me of that in terms of the quality.
Yeah, okay. I feel like it reminds me more of fan fiction still, but okay.
Let's be honest. What is the book version of, say, I don't know, Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi? There is a book version of it. I've read it. But fan fiction of the film.
Why have you read it? And it's not fan fiction. It's written... It's
officially
for better or for worse,
like,
it's not fan fiction. They'll have like some guy who like writes hundreds of books exactly the same. It'll be cold, it'll be sterile, it'll be professional, it'll give exactly what the fan wants because it's got everything written already. It doesn't need... It's super fucking easy, right? You can't fuck it up, almost, in comparison. Fan fiction... What makes fan fiction tier work is a lot about the quality of the writer more than anything else, I think.
I think you're misusing the term fan fiction as a synonym for bad writing, because fan fiction, at least to me, is usually just somebody can't be bothered to create a world. They don't want to have all the baggage of having to set up like a writing world to start with, and they just want to write a story within that sort of setting.
Okay, I could more correctly describe it as bad fan fiction. Would that be more accurate?
Yes, I think when you use that term in the past, it kind of makes more sense. Because he already has the world. He doesn't have to deal with the setting. He's just pulling characters.
I mean, to his credit, he's been very involved in the development of the setting.
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of the setting is Gav Thorpe's creation. He was one of the main fluff writers. So many of the books we will touch on in the future have in some way or another been inspired by work Gav Thorpe's done as a rules writer and a fluff writer in the early days of 40k. And I'll try and point someone out if we ever get to them.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, so we made it 2 pages into the fucking book at this point.
But I want to just talk about that whole character thing. Because here are some
train wreck the whole way through.
Here are some characters we're introduced to in that first scene. We're introduced to Cage's friend. I can't remember his name. His personality trait or quirk is that he's Cage's friend. There's Cronin. Cronin is he speaks in imperial script. In like he basically like he's reading out of a Bible. He can only quote Bible.
Franks or Joretz?
Huh?
Is his friend Franks or Joretz?
Franks. I think it's Franks.
Yeah, Franks is the one who speaks in Bible verses.
No, Cronin's the one who speaks in Bible verses.
Wait, is he?
Cronin speaks in Space Bible. And then there's another guy there who is like, his personality trait is he can't be trusted. And everybody hates him because he betrayed people at some point.
Oh yeah, even within the Penal Legion, everybody hates traitors. They have. So one of my favorite parts as well is describing all of the different types of criminals you get in the Penal Legions, and it's like thieves and looters and murderers and rapists, and then randomly you just get and necrophiles, and he carries on.
Oh my god! Yeah,
it's like what?
So edgy. There's also. Oh, is Jarrett the one who's like a noble?
One of them is a baron, wasn't he?
One of them is a former baron. Yeah, that's one of them. His personality trait is he was a baron.
He's very good at hunting. He knows a lot about hunting, wasn't he?
Was that him?
Yeah, that was him. No,
that's Lindskrug.
Here's the important thing. Most of these characters are red shirts. They're there to die. They don't have any character because it doesn't matter. They're cannon fodder.
Well, I mean, they have enough character so that you can be like, oh, look, one of the characters died later on.
So we have this scene, and they're introduced, and they all get shoved into their pens because they're treated like animals. Okay. Right, what happened next?
You were talking about the traitor and how nobody trusts him.
Yes.
I like the line where it says, it doesn't matter what you did, now we're all last chances. Except for him, he's a traitor. Fuck him. Literally within the same sentence.
Yes.
It was fucking amazing.
Yeah.
And stereotypically, obviously, the guy has small, beady eyes because, he's not to be trusted.
They could have been shifty eyes.
They could have been shifty eyes. I think they probably did dart around a lot. Knowing the way this is going, I'm pretty sure that was the way it was written.
So, was the next scene after this? Was that after this chapter? Was that when they landed on the world that had been abandoned or something? The one that was like the one that had some people had shown up there and there'd been like the weird jungle world. Was it that one? It had like a weird. The world had a weird name that had been like it was almost like an ironic name or something.
It was Last Hope.
Last Hope. That was it. It was the last place.
No, it was like Fake Hope or some bullshit like that. It was
False Hope?
False Hope. That's the one. That sounds about right.
Yeah, it was basically some guys had landed there at some point and then nobody had picked up their distress beacon and then other people showed up and they called it something like that. They call it False Hope. Anyway, they go there because... why do they go there? Does anybody know why they went to False Hope?
It was something about Tyranids. I don't know. At one point...
they were there because something had happened and they wanted to check it out and make sure there wasn't Tyranid stuff going on, right?
Yeah, at one point Cage gives like a really lengthy and descriptive lecture.
Oh, he reads like a product catalogue description of a Tyranid out. And it's,
Yes.
Yeah. They get to the camp, they find these weird seeds and then nothing comes of them.
Yeah, literally, the seeds don't matter at all. There's they don't come up again unless they're sort of like maybe a precursor that was so vague that it was almost unnoticeable.
And then they go into the jungle to go and try and find the last, because they find one guy who basically says, the rest of them all just went off into the jungle to go to this thing in the middle of the jungle. So they find a one guy who's there at the camp who goes, okay, everybody else left to go to this thing in the jungle. I got left behind. And they all go off to go into the jungle. Oh, I just remembered something. There are a bunch of them who get, injured. And they have to help them along, right? That's before, when they're at the camp, right? Did someone get fever or get injured there? Was that before or after the attack? I feel like some of them were injured even before the attack.
Look, the problem is a bunch of so much shit happens completely randomly in this book that I barely remember the order of any of it.
Okay. Well, I wanted to make a note that somewhere in this chapter there's a bunch of guys and they're like, we can't leave them behind. We have to care about them. And basically, we are at no point given any indication from how they actually talk about each other that they care. It's just like, oh, we need to show that they care about each other. We're going to do that by having someone be injured and someone be like, no, Schaefer, we can't leave them behind.
And Schaefer's just like, fucking kill them all.
Now, here's the thing. This is another thing that came up in Nazi Pulp. And I'm going to describe a passage from a later part of the story, which ties very much into this. There's something There's something about battle that unites men like us, whether it's for a common cause or, like us, just for survival. You're all in the same crap, and that makes a bond stronger than friendship or family. But as soon as the battle's finished, the cause is gone and they fragment again. I've come to realize a lot about these men, and myself along with them, over the past 30 months. They're born fighters, men who are at their best in combat. Any other situation, they're not with a damn, but with a knife or a gun in their hands, they seem a whole lot happier somehow. I know I am.
But
I like to know the man in front of me is...
God, here's the thing. All of this, though, it's like one of the worst cases, I'm trying to think, one of the most like transparent cases of telling and not showing. Never does it...
yes, it's going to be a line later I'll be using about
the only person, I think it's Frank's, is the only person, I think it's Frank's, is the only person who he actually feels like he's a friend. Nobody else does he have any interaction with as if they're a friend. He just says they're his friend. He goes, we need to have them, take care of them and have them with us. But the way they actually talk to each other or interact is nothing like they care at all. In fact, he quite often just shows disdain for people and is like, well, I don't care, I'm out for myself. But then sometimes yes.
Cage is like basically a huge contradiction throughout the entire story. So in the sense that you were saying the Cage feels emotions. You were saying that Cage feels emotions, but at the same time, he keeps
telling us he doesn't.
He also has scenes. Well, yeah, he also has scenes where he demonstrates that he has like no fucking feelings for anybody ever. Like it's like if he actually has a conversation with somebody that reveals that he actually cares about anything other than himself and survival, that he wouldn't be edgy enough to be the main character.
But even that okay, so when I said he has emotions, I mean like he runs hot compared to Schaefer running cold.
Oh yeah, he has anger. His only emotion is anger.
Yeah, he's angry. It's like, or like contempt or disdain. It's like an active dislike of everybody other than himself.
Yeah, so there's an interesting bit later on. It's in the short story. I think not the short story. It's the beginning of the second book, I think, where Schaefer's picking him up from the prison that he left him in.
Well, let's do that in a.
Well, it's so relevant to this discussion, though. I kind of have to just mention this brief bit. They say that he's being diagnosed as a psychopath or like sociopath or psychopath, one of those two. And at the time, I would have said this doesn't seem to fit Cage because he does seem to actually have emotions, and he does seem to actually have certain feelings about other people, even if it's just like fucking like weird feelings with Schaefer, where it feels like he's been basically held hostage so long that he's got what the fuck's it called? Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah.
He has some massive Stockholm syndrome vibes when it comes to Schaefer, and I don't know whether whether I'm sort of misconstruing some of the things he does as emotions, but like he definitely doesn't seem like a psychopath.
I know what you mean. But the fact that he's called that is just so it's like the icing on the cake, isn't it? Because he doesn't really act like one, but he tries to describe him as being like one anyway. He is a walking contradiction.
But he's insanely violent. Like it depends. Like if it almost feels like Kime eventually will come to a point where he's like, Thorpe. Sorry, Thorpe.
We haven't reached Kime yet.
I keep saying
I can't wait for you to constantly confuse Kime for Thorpe.
I don't know any of these authors is the thing, so yeah, I just see their names written on things. And the anyway, yeah, Thorpe. He'll come across like occasionally he'll be like, there hasn't been an action scene for a good while now, so I'm going to come up with a weird reason for there to be one, and then it'll just be a fight with Cage again, because it always is.
Speaking of, that happens in the jungle on the way there. They don't need to fight something on the way there in the jungle, but they do. And before that is a scene I would like to look at this scene and examine it as some examples of some things that he does wrong. So I'm going to read out a little passage here.
Okay.
Do you know why there's a trail here? Asks Lindskrug, glancing sideways at me as he sits down gingerly on a fallen log, his lean, muscled frame showing through the clinging tightness of his sweat-sodden shirt. I don't know, because the Emperor loves us, I say, teasing the sodden sock from my foot and wringing out the sweat and marsh water. Because creatures move along here regularly, he says, wrinkling his nose at my ministrations on my feet. They travel along here frequently, thus forming the trail. Very interesting, I tell him dryly, slipping on my damp footwear. I learnt that hunting back home on the estate, he says sagely, screwing the cap back on the water bottle. I bet you did, I think to myself. Lindskrug was once a baron on Corral, and he says that his political opponents fragged him good and proper, stitching him up for unlicensed slaving. Oh no. He's never even been in the guard before the last chances, so whoever his enemies were, they must have scratched quite a few backs in their time. Why is that so useful for hunting, I ask, switching feet while I wriggle the toes on my right foot inside my clammy boot. Because that's where to look for the prey, he says, with exaggerated patience, turning his hawkish features to look at me across the shoulder, his eyes giving me a patronizing look. But if you know that, I say slowly, little gears in my head beginning to whir into slow life, then don't the animals know it? The other predators do, he says quietly. What? I half scream at him. The other last chancers around hurriedly glance in my direction, hands reaching instinctively for lasguns. You mean that things will be hunting along here? That's right, Lindskog says, with a slow, nonchalant nod. Did you think of letting the Colonel know that? I ask, desperately trying to keep my temper in check. Oh, I'm very sure he knows, Lindskog says, taking his helmet off and rubbing the sweat out of his long hair.
Making that entire, bit completely pointless, other than maybe for a little bit of foreshadowing.
Well, it's not pointless, because here's the thing with it. This scene is trying to communicate to us, the readers, that there is danger. And it's trying to do that by saying, hey, we need to give the reader a reason to think predators might be here. Oh, well, they're in a natural trail, right? So let's explain why, right? The whole point of this is to try and make the reader feel like there's danger.
Well, that's something like foreshadowing.
He does exactly... Yeah, well, it's not so much foreshadowing as a build-up. It's not like...
It's
kind
so
of.
see again.
I can't call this foreshadowing. This isn't foreshadowing so much as like.
Oh fuck's sake!
It's like I hear you. Sorry. It's foreshadowing is like subtle though. This isn't like a hint of something to come.
You know what this is?
Go on.
Do you know what this is? This is basically one of the most infamous scenes in fiction. This is very clearly cribbing from is in Jurassic Park. Boom! This little ring of water in a cup. You know the T-Rex is coming. That's what he's trying to do.
But it's not like that. He could literally do just that. But instead of that...
It would have been amazing had he actually done that.
In a bit, he does something like that, though. He talks about them hearing a noise, and they go, get out of the way, and they get out of the way, blah, blah, blah. But this is instead, it's like, hey, I'm going to explain and excruciate... This is the thing I was talking about before. One person, he even says... What's the word he uses? He says sagely... One of them is like sagely and giving this wisdom. The other person, Cage, is the dumbest motherfucker on the planet.
He does come to the deduction about the predators, though.
Yeah, he comes to the deduction. Okay, so, creatures move along here regularly. At that point, you should go, oh crap, maybe dangerous things on this planet are here. Like, I omitted a little bit before that.
It surely could even be the dangerous things that make the paths too. Like, if it's just a path, of course things are going to use that path because it's easier than walking around.
I just want to say, I cut a little bit from the start of this passage because it was already kind of long, but immediately before this passage, Cage was like, oh, great, there's a path here. That makes things so much easier. He's actually happy to find the path. And then it goes into this as like, oh, path means creatures. And Cage doesn't go, oh, creatures, oh, there could be predators. Yes, you're right. That could have been it. Instead, it's like, okay, I don't understand why you're telling me this. And then it's like, I learned that hunting back home. Why is that useful for hunting? Because that's where to look for prey. Yeah. And then the gears slowly turn. He even describes him as a dumbass. Slowly, little gears in my head beginning. He even describes, he takes pain to make him sound like a fucking dumbass.
The thing is, though, I don't think he's ever trying to say, and unless it's tactical decisions and shit like that, later on with the orcs, Cage shows some fucking.
He has tactical acumen, but the point here is that it's not just Cage. This happens. It happens more of Cage, but it's not just Cage. I'll give you an example of it later as well. But this isn't about Cage being an idiot because Cage doesn't need to be this stupid. This is about Gav Thorpe is trying to make sure you, the audience, understand it. Gav Thorpe thinks you are a fucking idiot and need this explained and needs you to go through 4 extra steps to understand this concept. And then he has Cage react violently as if this is suddenly oh crap, I'm actually in danger and I had no idea before. Holy.
But you don't wasn't he? He's come up with this clever way, right, that they can be at risk and then suddenly realizing that they're at risk, and he's got to explain explicitly to the reader, otherwise you might miss this clever setup that's just waiting for the fucking dinosaur.
The other thing in this passage I want to point out, okay? Blah blah blah, asks Lindskog, glancing sideways at me as he blah blah blah. I don't know why, blah blah blah, I say, teasing the sodden sock from my foot and wringing out the sweat and marsh water. Because creatures blah 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 blah, he says, wrinkling his nose at my ministrations on my feet. Very interesting, I tell him, slipping on my damp footwear. I learnt that blah blah blah, he says sagely, screwing the cap back on his water bottle. Why is that so useful, I ask, switching feet while I wriggle. Like, what? Why are you inflicting this? Every single line is, I'm going to say he says, and then run on with a verb, with a description of what the character is doing as he says this.
That's how you keep conversation interesting, don't you know? You put actions in between the texts.
Every single he says has an associated like proper sentence describing an action that they are doing at that time.
Yeah.
Every single.
It's overused. It's like he read up how to, or he saw one example of this somewhere and then just went, well, I have to do this every time there's any conversation at all because I've got to just keep the action moving. But it's pointless stuff. It's not like it continues the plot, right? It's just
almost every single one of those lines in that thing ended with was line he says action. The only one of them doesn't, which is the other predators do. He says quietly. Which just has a nice little adverb there. Every single other line in that accompanies what is said with a description of what they are doing while they say it. And it's so clunky and awful.
It is clunky and awful if you're reading it in prose form. Imagine if this was a movie. It would be perfectly fine.
Yeah, you're right. That would be fine in a movie. Because that's just like almost just directions on a script.
Yeah. Which is the problem. Gav Thorpe is... In this book and these books, in fact, even more so in the next one, he is basically writing a movie script in prose form. And that's the problem. A movie script does not work in prose form. If you're trying to make prose look like a movie, you don't do it if your writing's this poor.
I mean, you also
can do it.
It was apt that you used Jurassic Park as an example, because obviously there is a dinosaur, and we're about to find out. You know, the dinosaur is watching them.
And then, of course, there's the fucking... Talk about putting your references on the nose. Stay still. Lindskrook tells me out of the corner of his mouth. Some lizards can't see you if you don't move.
Yeah, you even have the obligatory scene where the giant lizard reptile thing opens its eyes slowly and it's just staring at Cage, and the Cage is like looking at it. It's like, what?
Oh yeah, and then any chance that it eats bushes and stuff? I whisper to Lindskrook, not particularly hopeful, as if in reply, the creature's huge jaw opens and reveals row after row of serrated teeth, obviously used for stripping flesh and crushing bone.
I mean, it seems like a replication of a bunch of different Jurassic Park scenes all merged up into one. Really.
It is, but at the same time, like he seems to have it's got rows of serrated teeth, and then he has to explain what those serrated teeth do. It's not like your reader could tell that if it's got sharp teeth, it could fucking eat meat. No! We have to point out that they're obviously used for stripping flesh and crushing bones, because we're fucking dumbasses.
And we gotta show that Cage is able to deduce some things, right?
And then Schaefer comes along, and then they kill the dinosaur, and then we move on.
Cage has a fucking fist fight with the dinosaur.
Oh, he does as well, yes.
Yeah.
He gets right in. That's
most of it, like... And then we set up the thing, we neatly wrap it up and move on to the next one. As I think was described with these Nazi exploitation books, the violence runs on like a video game. And in many regards, these constant punctuated with fight scenes is the sort of thing you'd have in a video game. Of course, the video games at this time, well, they were getting better, but they were still pretty primitive.
Anyway, the God Plant.
More drink to deal with this. Oh, the God Plant.
Oh, the God Plant.
We move along. Yes. We find the God Plant. I think the God Plant scene might be the highlight of this book. Not because it's good, but like, it's interesting. It's different.
It's exactly the sort of thing you see in a B action movie.
Yeah,
this was the
terrible special effects.
It was the first thing that came up in this book that actually made me think, okay, the rest is maybe, you know, it's okay. It's plodding along. I'm interested, I guess, to an extent. This was the bit where I was just like, holy fuck, this is lame. Like, really lame. Just so lame.
I feel like the God Plant scene at least described it felt like a very generic, it didn't feel like a 40k monster setup. It felt like a generic monster setup. You know?
It feels like a Star Trek episode.
Yeah.
It could have just beamed down.
It could have been a Star Trek episode. It could have been like a chapter in a D&D module. It's just a generic monster enemy thing. And even so, it felt interesting for being a different sort of scene to everything else so far in the book, to me. Which is
everything else is so far been generic, the Imperial Guard.
Yeah. I don't know.
It just felt out of place.
It did feel out of place. I can agree it felt out of place.
What the fuck is this thing? Like, it just didn't feel right for the 40k setting. It just felt so fucking strange.
He gets tempted, and then he, like... Did he snap out of himself? Yeah. Right? Or did he get,
I think he resists this, yeah. He gets really close.
He, like, barely resists. He, like, hears some Schaefer yelling and resists or something, and then he feels shame.
Yeah, and Schaefer later says something like, only the weakest of Imperial minds would succumb to such a temptation, and Cage is like, well, I almost did, fuck.
Cage gets some serious imposter syndrome there.
Yeah.
Anyway. And then they move on to the next area. Go on.
His line, I love his line there. Those we left behind were weak, he says sternly. To give in to alien domination is one of the greatest acts of treachery against the Emperor. Remember that well.
Yeah, that's the one. That's the line.
Yeah. So next, I think next is the scene where they get... sorry, go on.
They get some... I was going to say, is this the bit where they get the new recruits?
Yes. After this, they pick up Laurie and Lauron from who I believe have walked in from a Dr. Seuss novel.
4 on 5
I think they've walked in from a Dr.
characters.
Oh yeah, I believe they walked in from a Dr. Seuss novel.
Basically,
I thought you were going to say they walked in from a Doctor Who novel because.
Oh no,
Dr. Seuss. Yeah, definitely. I agree with that.
They've got Dr. Seuss names. Laurie reminds me kind of like. What's her name? Lilu and Fifth Element. As this weirdly, like, I don't know, it's like an evil, like an edgy version of Lilu from Fifth Element.
So it's sort of amnesia, not quite.
I'm thinking more just in terms of like, you know what, like, the main ways he describes her are like creepy ways of describing a pretty woman.
Yeah,
you have to remember,
and she's basically Pretty Woman
the
who is
only woman
incredibly competent and violent. Also, the only woman. Yes,
she is the only woman for this novel because there'll be another only woman in the next novel.
Laurie and Lauron are described. Oh my god! So they're like practically twins, and this isn't explained, but the way they're described is very like something weird is up to them.
They're white. Everything about them is white.
They're also kind of like the twins in the Matrix Reloaded almost. They're like very white. It describes her as having like alabaster skin later on. So Laurie arrives and it has 3 back-to-back scenes of fast-track character development. One is they get introduced and everybody's all like, "Ooh, how do we talk to women?" Then there's like a really infantile vibe to how he describes her as a woman. Mm-hmm. And it's just a bit further introduction, but it's just Cage taking her in. And then the third bit is somebody tries to like grope her and he pulls his eyeball and she pulls his eyeball out.
So let's describe how that scene starts though, because they come out of training and she's wandering around without a top on in an entirely male platoon of criminals. And then she says, after attacking this guy and pulling his eye out, after admittedly he does grope her, "I don't like being stared at by perverts." I just found that pretty amazing. I like that scene. It was good.
You say it's good, but the thing is, it's just free. It's just 1, 2, 3. We're going to, as quickly as possible, try and cover this character. We're going to fast-track character development and make you understand this is an edgy, badass character by having her just be gratuitously violent to somebody else. We're going to write somebody in trying to molest a woman so we can show some gratuitous violence and develop and explain this facet of her character.
Say this was a B movie, this would also be the case of the gratuitous nudity, which is quite common in these kind of films. You'll have the woman who goes topless just so he can get some boobs into
90% of 80s B movies
scene like
or
that
bad movies have that. Oh yeah.
Yeah, and this is literally it. I mean, if it's literally him getting some titty into the story because those are in the kind of media he's basing this off.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a funny scene though, in my opinion, just because like it's a very strange thing to do, and you'd be like, why is she doing this in possibly the worst situation you could imagine? And then you're like, oh well, because the plot
demands somebody do something to her so that she can.
It does kind of fit with her character, but also at the same time, it
fits with her character, and her character is a garbage edgelord OC.
Exactly. Exactly, but it is consistent.
Her character is basically Sarah Connor from Terminator 2, with absolutely none of the stuff that makes it interesting. Because Sarah Connor in Terminator 2 has a character. She's building upon the character from T1. She's not just a badass, she's a badass for very specific reasons. And being a badass, as I think James Cameron himself has pointed out, she's basically turned herself into the Terminator. And Laurie is definitely trying to be Sarah Connor.
Yeah, I can see that. The other interesting thing is that she pulls the guy's eye out, and there are zero repercussions for this at all. And I feel like it's kind of strange to allow people to just go around blinding each other in a Guards Legion.
Because
one thing you can't do
Colonel Schaefer is a badass, isn't he? He's getting the best. And so if someone gets their eye pulled out, they're clearly not the best.
Well, if your entire Legion suddenly doesn't have any eyes, that would make for a pretty shit Imperial Guard Legion. Although you might just make them minesweepers, because, that makes perfect sense in the Imperial
Well,
Guard
because
world.
minesweepers were actually what the real-life historical penal battalions were mostly used for. They were basically sent in the heads to spot out the machine guns and step on the mines.
Yeah, I was referencing...
badass groups sent in to do special covert missions.
I was referencing the blind guy, though, in the Ghost Legion, that they make a minesweeper.
I want to just say, one of the, I can't remember which book it is, but one of them actually mentions that the previous sort of design for penal legions was to just do, hey, I'm going to sweep mines, or hey, I'm going to self-destruct to kill you or something. Like, I've got a bomb vest type thing. So they're actually part of this whole thing is trying to take the penal legions away from that vibe. Interesting.
They do make a comment about they travel for a year or something across the Imperium, and they're like, what are we going to do when we get out there? And one of them says something like, maybe they'll have us sweep for mines. And he's just like, you think they'd have us travel a year across the Imperium to go fucking sweep mines? And then they make some comment about the penal legions there, I think.
So after this, we get...
Go on. Want me to describe it? I've actually got it written down here. Shuttle crashes attacked by metal-eating bugs.
Yes. So I had some huge fucking problems with this scene.
You mentioned something about this scene as you were reading it. Do you want to tell us more?
Okay, so when I was reading this scene, so it starts off with them just going into this crash scenario, which is described in so much fucking detail that we get like a ridiculous amount of action scenes for just the shuttle actually crashing in the first place. The best bit, in my opinion, about that is when he goes on the comms to find out what happened, and Colonel Schaefer just shouts at him something like, the pilots had a synaptic hemorrhage. It just says that. And Cage is like, okay. and then he's like, the co-pilot is trying to deal with that. It's like, okay, the co-pilot is trying to deal with the fact that the pilot just had a synaptic hemorrhage. So I'm going to assume from the phrasing, he wants us to think stroke when he says that.
I thought stroke.
Yes. Well, that's because synaptic in our mind triggers brain, and hemorrhage is a bleed. And it is probably
time, synaptic systems actually exist in the 40k universe. It's like synaptic connections between pilots and their crafts, Titan Princeps and the machine. So I always thought that synaptic hemorrhage, something to do with the landing or the flying, some feedback on the craft caused his brain to blow out, basically.
That makes so much more sense, because synaptic hemorrhage is not a medical term. It's like so close to a medical term, but not quite there. See, it confused me, because I feel like he just jammed these two words together. And I was wondering whether this was, this is something he just made, for trademarkable shit for Games Workshop or whatever. But no, that makes so much more sense if it's caused by part of the actual connection to the ship. Why that made it impossible for the co-pilot, who should have also already been kind of flying the ship with him, and why the ship immediately lost control and had to crash land on a planet, is another question. But we'll find out later that there's a lot more to this, and it kind of, at least in my mind, kind of fixed a lot of the problems that I had with the scene.
It certainly explains it, the explanation later, but it just makes everything all the more dumb as well.
I agree, but it does kind of explain, the pilot just randomly having a stroke and crashing the plane, and the co-pilot not being able to fix the issue, and yeah. But it is somewhat explained later, but it's better than just the idea that the pilot just randomly had a fucking stroke and crashed the plane, and the co-pilot could do nothing about it.
Schaefer, was crashing this plane part of your plan? Of course. Was capturing this plane that was getting captured part of your plan? Of course. What's next? Crashing this plane with some survivors. Oh, I butchered that.
You did butcher that. You and I both had a lot to drink.
So
now,
that crash scene goes on for way too long.
Yeah.
I wanted to compare that against the William King's drop pod sequence. Because the drop pod sequence, it really, like, you get in Ragnar's head, you feel, like, his tension about it. It actually feels really tense. Like, I think I said last time, like, you simultaneously feel really tense, but then you're also like, oh, but we know he gets out of it, it's fine. And then all the things he starts talking about that could go wrong actually go wrong, and you're like, oh, fuck. And the way he describes it actually makes you feel, like, the tension. This, I didn't feel the tension, I felt bored, I was like, get it over with. It was not well written.
That's because you're not...
It's like, it reminds me of Red Dwarf. There is a scene in Red Dwarf, I think it was season 5, it was the one where Ace Rim was introduced, where they're crashing, and what they do is they get down the chairs, put their head between their legs, and read the in-flight magazine as they're going to crash. It's a hilarious scene, one of my favourites in Red Dwarf, but the crash here reminded me of that, and yes, it's a crash, but you do not... It's a joke.
I mean, the thing is, I think the main difference between that and the scene you get in Spaceballs is that in the Spaceballs scene, you are learning about the 40k world. In this, you don't really learn anything because it's kind of just similar to how you'd expect any crash landing to be in a regular aeroplane or something like that.
The drop pod one, it's like he's describing all these things that can go wrong, and he's introducing these, like, the way he's talking about them is, it's almost like educating you on the danger, or reminding you of the danger, and it's danger in a way that's, and, they're in this rattling
it's
thing.
It's unique to that scenario.
Yes. Whereas this is just like, oh, I've seen planes crash in movies before.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a typical, like, crash landing. It's like describing a movie scene.
What I was going to talk about was the metal-eating bugs that threaten their shuttle in their escape.
So this is something. There's
happen to be living below the penal legion.
This whole thing here has no drama, no tension. The drop pod scene had, like, the tension, the build-up. The crashing thing is just like, oh, suddenly now we are crashing. There's no drama, there's no tension build-up. It's just happening. Then you get into the cave, and it's like, oh no, now there are bugs biting it! And they burn some of the bugs. And it's like, alright, what do we do next? Oh, we'll go in here. And then they do the thing. And now the bugs are attacking us. There's no, like, build-up. It doesn't feel like there's an effective build-up. It's just things happening.
Oh, he's not trying to build it up.
It is literally just an event that happens. As he says at the beginning, though, this is probably
but,
a short
like, the whole
story.
thing, no, this wasn't a short story. I'll tell you when we get to the short story. But this is literally...
What the fuck was this, then? It's literally a self-contained article, again.
But the thing is, this self-contained article, there's no build-up, there's no tension, there's no, ooh, I wonder what'll happen here, or are we going to make it out of here? It's just like, one thing happens after the other. It's so mechanical and dull.
It's a bad action movie. Think about it. How many bad action movies have fight scenes just happen so you can see? Yeah.
But it's not even just about the fight. It's about the things they do as well. There's no, like... But yeah, it is like a bad action movie. You'd get bored because it's just like, oh, there's no build-up. It's just, oh, now they're fighting again. It is like that.
Here's the thing. We were comparing William King's Space Wolf books to action movies.
No, we compared it to a good B movie.
Yes, a good B movie. And Gav Thorpe's books are an example of what's more common to happen in that front.
Yeah. Well, they're not... Gav Thorpe's aren't a B movie. They're a bad movie. There's a difference, So, this isn't trend.
If they were a...
There's another example here of a running theme through a lot of these books, and it is that Cage does something that you could consider courageous. Courageous.
But at the same time, he's just like, I don't trust him. I'm out to save my own skin.
Exactly, but he undermines it by like immediately underwriting it with the reasoning being that he actually doesn't just trust anyone else to do the job, so he's going to do it himself.
And you know why this happens?
Because it's edgy?
No, it's because Gav Thorpe wanted to have a scene where Cage is on his own holding out against all the bugs, and he needed to phone in a justification for it. That's why it happens.
I see. Well, but also he can't have Cage be an actual, actual heroic character because he's trying to run some sort of weird line with like Commissar Kane, who is technically a hero but also a coward.
That comes later.
Constantly.
Those haven't been written yet. He's not trying to write anything with that, but it's the same.
Well,
yeah,
no,
it's
but
a
what I mean
similar
is
thing.
it's like that sort of trope. He's on the level of like, he keeps trying to do this, but it just fails at being bad. He fails at being bad at things, so he ends up being really good.
But in here, we're actually in his
That's
head,
what I
and
think.
he's like actively. He's not just like, well, I tried to say, but then I ended up stuck in this situation. He's like, I'm in this situation not by accident, but because I think it's the best thing to do for saving my own skin. It's, no, it's hard to like articulate the difference and the parallel here, but it's very
that justification.
Yeah.
Turns up so much.
Yeah,
like,
I know. I'm having
you could
a hard
be talking
time.
about so many scenes when you say that.
I'm having a hard time trying to like articulate the difference, but the vibe isn't the same.
Very simple. Gav Thorpe wants to have his cake and eat it too.
Yes.
He wants Cage to be the hero, but he also wants him to be the cold steel, e.g., nothing personnel kid.
Yes.
So he has to have him do heroic things like the hero in the story, while at the same time trying to justify that he's...
Yeah. The other thing I mentioned about there's no drama, no tension, and I specifically mention it in this scene because the ending of it, it's like a proper, like, the ending of that scene is a proper Starship Trooper vibes thing, right? It's like here they are, like, man standing against the bugs. Which are,
yeah.
We don't understand how they think they're coming at us and we're fighting them off. It was that vibe, and it could have been a cool vibe, but it was undermined so badly by having no setup, no dramatic tension.
Well, and they're being just a random throwaway enemy because, like, it was obvious that they weren't relevant because they weren't named, right?
Yeah.
They weren't Tyranids, they weren't orcs, they were just some random fucking metal-eating bug that was for some reason that usually lives on, like, iron oxide or metal oxides or whatever living out of the rock, and now they've got this ship in front of them and they're like, oh, we'll have that instead. Aside from the fact that, like, are ships and stuff not made of, like, plascrete or whatever the fucking, like, weird 40k
I've got to be made of some sort of
composite
40k
bullshit.
trademarkable metal name. Don't worry about that.
So can that just be eaten by bugs that would normally be eating metal oxide?
We got bugs right now that eat like non-biodegradable plastics. Like,
True.
It's an alien.
Well, bacteria.
It's an alien.
Yeah. I'm not saying they couldn't. It's just saying like it feels like some super fucking high-end composite.
It doesn't need to like conform to any sort of rules. It's an alien in a sci-fi space fantasy type thing. Okay, don't think about it.
Fair enough.
You've said that several times now. Don't think about it.
Don't think about it.
Let's be blunt. Don't think about it is the through line for this book and for all the others. You are not supposed to think about any of this any more than you're supposed to think about it if you're watching a B-action movie. You're not supposed to think about it. You're supposed to go, whoa, look, Cage just killed that guy. What an edgy badass. Oh, look, it's a Tyrannosaurus.
Oh look, metal-eating bugs, and now they're fighting things with flamethrowers. Okay, so we have that scene. I don't think there's much more to be said to that. Really.
Yeah. So next scene, I think.
Next scene, we find out about a guy called Jonathan in the 40k world, which I found very amusing because that sounds like a very un-40k.
Was that
name.
Who was he? Which mannequin was that?
This was between two Navy officers, I think, and one of them is called Jonathan.
Yeah. Okay.
Which I loved. Jonathan. All right. Well. Okay, we find out a little bit in the next bit about Schaefer and his background. We don't find out a huge amount because we still don't know anything.
Did we? I don't remember that. Tell me.
So there's a little bit where he sort of describes how Schaefer operates within the Imperium, how he's reliant on the Navy to basically ship him around. He tries to give an order to the Navy, and he should supposedly be able to do it because it's unlike Schaefer to be giving orders unless he actually believes he has the authority to, and yet he's denied. Because...
You know what? This is okay, so this is one of these things where it's part of like a mystery. It's almost set up like, why does he have this authority? But it's also not...
It's never explained.
So here's this... Well, it is explained, but it's not really handled elegantly at all in that scene. Here's the thing. Throughout these books, there is a big theme of, one, talking about the nature of penal legions as if they are a commonplace thing in the 40k setting, right?
Yeah. There's penal colonies everywhere.
Sure.
Like,
and two,
there seems to be new ones everywhere.
But two, at the same time, this one works in a really specific way, but also they just treat it like, and that's why penal legionnaires are the best sometimes. They have this dumbass logic behind that line that comes out all the time. But Schaefer's simultaneously treated as running a normal part of the Imperial workhorse, like war machine, and at the same time, he's how should I put it?
He's special because they don't actually have any orders. He just does whatever the fuck he wants.
Well,
and
no,
they sort of
he's special, and he has a special. It's because he's got ties in the Inquisition, and the Inquisition use him to do jobs, and somehow it's almost like he's running some sort of like Inquisition, like almost like the Grey Knights are like an Ordo Malleus ties thing in the Space Marines, and the Death Watch are they have heavy ties to the Ordo Xenos. Instead of like that, it's like, hey, some Inquisitions have got ties with some guy who has a penal legion, and they use him to do things that they want a penal legion for. And this is sort of like, it's really poorly, this fact is really poorly handled. Whenever it talks about, like, whenever it's trying to describe how this penal legion works, it's...
You're not supposed to know, and you're not supposed to care.
Well, the thing is, you're supposed to... You're not supposed to know at the start. At the start, it's supposed to be a mystery. It's like, it's treated as commonplace, but it's like, as the book goes on, you get these interactions like the one there, where he goes, hang on, why does he think he has authority to countermand what the Imperial Navy are doing? Right? Why does he think that? And the answer to that turns out is because he actually has got some degree of like delegated inquisitorial authority, right? So
yeah,
it sort of builds up.
Else as well.
Yeah, it builds up.
Sort of, but the thing is with
it builds this up.
Most of the time we see him, he's not actually, dropping authority when he doesn't actually have the authority. Like, usually he's got all the paperwork already signed and backed up. If he's like making some random decision, sometimes weirdly enough, like even though it makes no sense, he's able to just pull this like authority out of nowhere with previously signed paperwork, even when it probably doesn't seem like there's been enough time for it.
It drip feeds you in on the mystery, but the actual like whatever's actually going on just feels incoherent. Like, it doesn't... It's like a contradiction between, like, is it a normal penal lead? Oh, it's like some sort of crack weird thing, but they're only using, like, prisoners. And the way, like, how did this authority structure end up set up? Why is this arrangement in place? Why is Schaefer the guy who's doing this? It's like, none of it... It doesn't feel cohesive at all. It's a mystery, and the answer to that mystery feels like it doesn't make any fucking sense. So you start off wondering, ooh, what's going on? And then it gets to the end, and it's like... Well, I kind of see what's going on, but it doesn't make any sense.
Could they not have just as easily make him like some sort of undercover fucking Inquisitor or something? Like the amount of power he seems to wield half the time would make perfect sense.
That would make so much more sense if, like, literally remove the Inquisitor from the whole thing and make him the Inquisitor, and suddenly everything makes sense.
So Auriel's character, who is the Inquisitor in this case, Auriel, who turns up at the end, his character is so inconsistent, it actually like gave me whiplash, I think, in the second book.
So the thing with the Inquisitor as well is it's like, hey, I'm an Inquisitor. Colonel Schaefer is my delegated guy who gets penal legionnaires.
He's like the enforcer.
and then he's like my delegated enforcer who does this. And then I just leave him to go off and do his own thing.
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, isn't that basically those kind of characters?
But that's the thing. If Schaefer's going to be off doing his own thing, make him the Inquisitor. You know?
But if he's the Inquisitor, then you can't have your Arnie guy who's leading them, who's the badass officer. Now, can you?
That doesn't stop. Surely an Inquisitor, if he's undercover, could have himself appointed a colonel in the army.
I think like the roles that different people have in terms of like that's the thing. He can be the badass officer, but is he a badass officer and also like basically a fucking interrogator or something at the same? Is he like he has so much? He has.
Okay, I'm gonna have to say this. I'm gonna have to say this now. But in the third book, they do kind of drop the suggestion that he's commissariat.
Yeah, it mentioned. Yeah, but they mentioned that there's like,
but it's thrown in there like out of nowhere.
It's part of like this whole like here's a puzzle that doesn't make sense. It's not even like a reveal that's just like, oh, is that how penal legions work? Is it commissarial authority that for penal legions? I'm not entirely sure.
Well, in 2004, the fluff had shifted a very long way from where it was in 2000. Anything that was silly was gone at that point.
Yeah.
It was shifted enough that I get the impression that Gav Thorpe really had to cover his ass.
Really? Because that book came across as completely insane and unhinged compared to even the other ones.
the whole thing of how everything works, there's a mystery behind how it works, and then there's the actuality of how it all works, what the rules are, and what the rules are is never clear, it's never coherent, it never feels like it makes sense. Even when the whole mystery is laid bare, you're like, is that who's in charge? What's the structure here?
By the end, it's even more confusing than at the beginning, I think. So, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
So the next scene.
The rest of this scene, the rest of what happens in this scene is like, okay, there's the Eldar attack, right?
No, so they're going to a planet to fight some orc slavers.
Well, before that though, isn't the Eldar attack before?
On the way, they get attacked by Eldar in orbit of the planet. So there's orcs on the planet, there's Eldar in orbit. They just come from Penal Legion that was getting attacked, that was covered in like weird bug things. They were fighting Tyranids on a world just before that.
Deliverance, and like before, yeah.
It all feels like this very, very small like area of space has like all of the shit happening. All of the like marketable
aliens
races are just thrown in.
Of course it does.
Yeah. So these are the Dark Eldar, which I don't
very much in the Space Wolf context.
I don't think we encountered Dark Eldar in the Space Wolf book. This is our first introduction to Dark Eldar in novels. Dark Eldar are they're opportunistic, they're slavers, they just want to go and they're like pirates almost, even though there's Corsairs who are pirates.
They're basically the Dark Eldar are basically an entire race of pinheads.
Yeah, okay.
What?
Yeah, pinhead.
Can you describe this?
Oh my god.
We
Hellraiser.
have such sights to show you.
Oh wait, I know it's from
Hellraiser.
Series by Clive Barker,
Yes.
in which the great and mighty Pinhead offers his temptations.
But it's not though, because it's not about temptations. It's I am here. Hello, I'm taking you against your will. We're going to torture you for long our own.
We're going to make you.
I disagree with
to make you experience a level of pleasure that is indistinguishable from pain.
Hellraiser and the puzzle box and the temptation, pleasure and pain thing is very Slaanesh. And to an extent, Dark Eldar are Slaanesh, but they aren't... Dark Eldar themselves are kind of that, but they don't like tempt people in the way that like Hellraiser, Cenobites and crap do. They're just... They're here to make your life a living hell.
They have the same aesthetic, though.
I wouldn't say they do. Dark Eldar?
Maybe not.
I don't know. Oh, maybe. I was Covens, maybe. Yeah.
In my notes, I was trying to figure out like what Eldar they were.
Oh,
so
definitely
I was like,
Dark
Eldar.
Eldar.
Yeah, and then so my notes they're going down, and I'm just like, oh, so are these Corsairs? Like they seem to have like they've got some of the abilities, or the way Cage describes them, they sound like they have abilities that both the Eldar and the Dark Eldar have in
video
Gothic,
games or whatever.
Gothic things, yeah. And then they actually board, and the first Dark Elder off the thing has a whip, and I was like, okay, yep. I know who these are.
That the second you see them, he paints a picture of them that makes you think, Dark Eldar.
The other thing, he never at any point says Dark Eldar.
Yeah, which I respect.
Eldar at him.
Yeah, he just makes. I give him credit here. He makes it very. They're just Eldar, which is what they are to the Imperium. And
oh god!
The way he describes them makes it very clear that they are Dark Eldar. Which I give him credit there.
This is purely a very private thing, but there is a character in here who he names Savini, after Tom Savini, the famous, was he a horror director, or did he do costuming for horror films? One or the other.
I don't know. That's cool.
Well, it's a very clear sign. I mean, Gav Thorpe has obviously watched Tom Savini films, because these things come off as very Tom Savini.
Okay.
When you say Tom Savini, what sort of films are we thinking?
Oh, he made horror films, like schlocky horror films in the 80s and 90s.
Can you name like a famous one? Give me like a point of reference.
I could do if I actually had a keyboard.
Hang on a second. How do you spell that?
He did like the makeup.
Oh, like Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead. Yeah. Okay.
Interesting.
So,
in terms of the Dark Eldar strategy here, you mentioned that they basically want slaves, which is when they wanted to board as opposed to just shoot them, I kind of thought this seems a bit Dark Eldery, and I was thinking Dark Elder Corsairs.
Yep.
But then they get on board, and the first thing they do is murder everyone in sight.
Well, you murder some people and you take the survivors. You don't just try and grab and run when there's still other people shooting you.
Okay, that's fair. So does Eldar always have like bright red blood? Is that an Eldar thing?
I don't know.
I always felt like they might have like blue blood or something.
I don't think I've seen Eldar bleeding described. I'm sure if we ever read any C.S. Gotto novels, I'll see it. Because I've heard he quite likes doing things to Eldar in his novels. but I've never seen. I've never seen
We'll
Eldar
get to those
blood
eventually.
described.
So in this, it's bright red, at least.
Okay. I feel like the Eldar were well characterized here.
Yeah, it seems like an interesting scene.
Here's the thing. He obviously characterized him well because he's writing fluff snippets and codices.
True. He has decided what they are, basically. So yeah.
And so all he's basically doing is writing an entry from a codex.
I don't know. Credit where credit's due, I guess. He's certainly they've certainly got a strong identity that he's managed to represent there. So he's done something there.
Yeah, I mean, fair is fair. If this scene had been in, say, one of the Space Wolf books that we read, I don't think I'd have said, this is a bad scene in that book. I think it just felt like a decent scene in this.
That's fine. That's fine.
I mean, obviously, the Dark Elder would have been kind of insane to board a Space Marine battle barge, but other than that,
well, so we talk about the rest of this here. After they attack, Cage has got he freezes and shuts down a bit. He has visions of his friend dying. He has visions of his friend dying, doesn't he? He has I've got a note here about him having some sort of visions or he sees it. Let me see. What did I write in my note?
I don't remember that. But I mean, he obviously starts having them later on. But I didn't realize he had them at this point.
Okay. Oh, okay. It's with Rolis. It's the scene with Rolis or something.
So there is a lot of interesting things in this scene.
Okay,
but I didn't know anything about.
Immediately before that, we have the whole thing of why are the Eldar attacking, and we have actually we've not pointed this out, but right before the Eldar attack, there's a bit of back and forth where people in the Navy are speculating that somebody is a mole and is feeding information to enemies. And then there's talk about the Eldar couldn't have known blah, blah, blah unless somebody tipped them off.
Yes.
So, naturally, who's to blame for that? Well, it's that guy, Rolis, who everybody knows has he betrayed people once before to save his own
Apparently
skin.
to the Eldar, though.
I don't know.
That was
okay.
Yeah. So Cage says, and it was the Eldar. And it was the Eldar last time too. He says.
Okay. Yeah. So then naturally they beat the shit out of Rolis, and this is portrayed. They beat him to death, and this is portrayed
literally lynch him. Yeah.
This is portrayed as Rolis is finally getting his comeuppance, but he's as if he's been a minor antagonist, but he's not been built up as an antagonist. We've just had Cage. Fuck you, you're a traitor, and then we've gone fuck you again.
There was another scene of him being a bully as well. Apparently he stole some guy's food or something.
Yeah, there's him being a bully. Cage beat basically shitting all over him and for what he's done in his past, and then here it's just now we've found you did this again, and we know it's you. We're going to beat you up. Hey, case closed. Until things.
Yet another demonstration, though, that the Penal Legion is clearly just they're obviously criminals. They're obviously
And also, in those Nazi exploitation films, the good guys were Nazis, the bad guys were Soviets. You weren't supposed to like anyone. Everyone was bad. Everyone was evil. Everyone was a monster.
I mean, that fits so well. That does fit so well with the 13th Legion and the way the Penal Legion, the way the Last Chances are betrayed.
So
portrayed. So there's an interesting scene before that though, which is that you see Schaefer and Cage in a scene where they have to make a decision, and the decision is we need to blow out the airlock, the loading bay or whatever it is, to get all the Dark Elder, throw them off the ship, and there's still soldiers in there holding and fighting. Some of which are Last Chances.
Yeah, and they blow them out the airlock.
Yeah, Schaefer doesn't do it himself, even though he's standing next to the Legion. He points his gun and says, "Cage, you do it," and makes Cage do it. And it is very pointless, but at the same time, I wrote in my notes here, and I think this kind of fits a lot of the rest of the books as well. It's almost like, despite the fact that Schaefer doesn't seem to care, every opportunity he takes, he seems to pretend that he absolutely hates Cage and that he would shoot him at a moment's fucking notice. He also seems to be mentoring him to be the perfect officer for his Legion.
Yeah.
For his Last Chances.
And so
abusive relationship.
Now I want to quote.
He doesn't
feel the thing.
I just want to say before you quote, he doesn't feel like an actual hard cold psychopath. He feels like it feels like an abusive relationship where he's just toying with him and going back and forth. But it feels like that. It doesn't feel like that's the author's intent. It feels like he's just written like that accidentally.
Yes, well then again, let's be honest. I don't think E.L. James was intending to write an abusive relationship either.
You say that, but later on, there's a lot of the idea of "I'm what you made me. Look at what you did to me." The Cage. These are all quotes from Cage talking.
Yeah, but that's supposed to be just like you've made me a monster, not you've abused me by pushing and pulling back and forth. That's just like you forced me to be a monster. That's the impression
I don't know.
got.
Maybe. I mean, I looking back. Obviously, I guess it's easier to be like, okay, this scene is like this scene looks like he's trying to instill that sense of like cold, like rational, having to make these decisions, even if it means the cost of his men's lives, because that's what the Colonel's going to need of him. That's what's going to happen later on in the other books. But like, yeah, I mean, you might be right. You might be, if I'm being charitable, it seems like this is setting up for that sort of thing. But like, otherwise, sure, it could be entirely around the fact that Cage is a massive, like, murderous monster later on.
I also
now let me,
sorry,
if I can. I was going to say I want to quote their description just after Cage has been forced by Schaefer to vent all these people out of the airlock.
Ooh.
Rage boils up inside me. He knew this was going to happen. Going to happen. Fuck it. Let me start again. Rage boils up. Oh.
I'm keeping this in.
Rage boil. Oh, fuck's sake.
Should we just give the quote?
All the fucking effort.
Go on.
Rage boils up inside me. He knew this was going to happen. As soon as the other attacked, he knew it had come to this. Don't ask me how he knew, or how I knew that he knew. But he did. I dropped a shotgun electric gaff and balled my hands into fists. Like a warm flood of anger froze through me, into my arms and legs, filling them with strength. I'm about to hurl myself at the Colonel when he turns to look at me. I see a twitch of muscles in his jaw and a resigned look in his eyes, and I realize that he's not totally without compassion. He might have seen this coming, but he doesn't look happy about it. The anger suddenly bleeds away into the air around me, leaving me feeling sick and exhausted. I drop to my knees and bury my face in my hands, rubbing at my eyes with my knuckles. Shock sweeps over me as I realize that I killed him. The Colonel made me kill all of them. The aliens, the ratings, the armsmen, the last chances. He made me do it, and I made the others do it. I hate him for that, more than I hate him for anything else he's done to me. I truly wish he was dead.
See, that's exactly what I'm talking about. He doesn't talk about like the Schaefer making him into something by like the abusive relationship, like, oh, I'm going to be nice to you now, I'm going to make you do this now type thing. It's like he treats it as if it's only the I'm making you do this. He doesn't treat him as mentoring in terms of that sort of side. It's like it's just ignored. It's like we're supposed to pretend that's not part of their dynamic.
So there is no mention of the the mentoring thing until maybe book 2.
Sure.
Although I don't know, I said that there's a little bit of it in this, but like I don't think it's a very through message. Although this might come back to the introduction where insert name of author here, which is Gav Thorpe. That's it. Gav Thorpe says something along the lines of there were through running plots or themes in this book, which I then made use of later on, which I can see that I had like inklings of in this first book, something like that. And I remember you seemed rather skeptical of this, wasn't he? But this could be an example of one of those. And maybe he didn't plan it, maybe he did. I think it's kind of hard to tell. But he definitely makes use of little bits of this.
There was one particular bit of it that I said there was none of. What was it? I know what it was. The bit I said, nope, that doesn't come up. Cage. There is a quote, Cage has always been looking to escape from something, as will be revealed within the story.
Yes, you're right.
At no point has it felt like Cage was trying to escape from something, other than like, I don't want to be in the Penal Legion, maybe? He does try to escape the Penal Legion, but it's not like there is something
there was
he's
no
running
big
from.
Bad shadow thing that came up behind him, and no.
Yeah. There's like foreshadowing for nothing.
Well, I was going to point out, because we were talking about earlier, and I only just noticed this, and it fucking made me head desk for a moment. Chapter 5 of this book is Cold Steel.
That's
the name of the chapter.
It's called Cold Steel.
Yeah, the thing is, Cold Steel is a parody because the very name itself sounds edgy. So,
yeah,
this book is like a case of really too fat.
Most edgy
Here's the other fun thing I realized. This thing is like an edgy book at that point before that particular type of edginess went out of fashion immediately thanks to 9/11.
I don't thanks to 9/11. That's a bold claim.
Yes. I mean, like,
that's
this sort of edginess that you see here is something that kind of... It's like in Turbulence 3, that period where you have that kind of fear of...
Please don't make this a discussion for the podcast. That's just beyond like anything that we could possibly justify. That's just going to sound hilarious and ridiculous.
What? I legitimately feel like you can tell this book was written before 9/11.
This is a
the
book,
way it
this is a
frames
book
itself.
before 9/11.
Yeah, it is.
What the fuck?
That's the
Did
thing,
9/11
you can-
cause that much psychological damage
Yes.
to the entire
Yes,
world
it
that it
did.
fixed? It fixed literature.
It didn't fix literature, it just made the edginess shift over to a different point.
I mean, this is also Gav Thorpe, who's British.
Yeah, but Dan Abnett did a comic after 9/11. It was printed in the anthology. I read it. But when you got people like him, like he did a comic about 9/11, and in that comic, I believe in his author's word, he talked about how much 9/11 shocked him.
Well, moving away from 9/11 and getting back on track with 13th Legion, I wanted to go back to that point about those memories, those visions of people dying. And I've remembered what that was now. It was while they were lynching Roland. He's having these like visions while he's beating him up of like his friend's death with the God plant and the people dying in the hangar or whatever. He's like
all the people.
He's basically having these like it's like cutting between them lynching him and him having these like flashes, these visions in his head. And to Gav's credit, it does actually give a sort of chaotic, out of control feel to it, which I think he was going for.
Yeah, it seems to fit quite well.
I think he
it
pulled
works okay.
That scene off okay.
It's interesting though, because clearly from this in this book, he's like, he wants to portray Cage as somebody who cares about his men, and then like it's like that either just disappears, or maybe the Colonel like destroys it, or I don't know what is supposed to have happened to that mentality of.
Isn't that supposed to be the scene I literally just read out, where he basically forces him to vent with his men out of the airlock?
Oh, just after that.
Yeah, but
when he's beating up Roland.
Yeah, that one event clearly didn't break Cage, because he does show that he cares. Like,
he fell on his knees and was like, ah.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely terrible. But like, what I mean is like, he shows consideration for his men, and he cares that he was forced to kill them. Like way after that, but like after this point, after this book, the other two books, that's not a through running thing at all. It just goes out the window, and Cage suddenly doesn't care about anything.
Okay, so this scene ends, and we end up on the ice planet.
Yes, we get chapter Cold Steel.
Chapter Cold Steel. I can't believe that.
Yeah, it's literally Chapter Cold. Look it up. Chapter 5, Cold Steel.
So the introduction chapter to paragraph to this, not paragraphs, but like section where it's not from Cage's perspective for this chapter.
Oh, what happened here?
There's a Wallmaster in here, and he says the line, "My superiors will do nothing to endanger their privileged position," which is possibly the best example of saying the quiet part out loud.
Yeah.
Yeah. So by ancient decree, as long as Coratanorum it still stands, Typhus Prime remains the capital world of Typhon Sector, and Typhus Prime Guard. And the Typhus Prime Guard are excused off-world duties. My superiors will do nothing to endanger this privileged position. So basically, most of the plot of this story happens, like, for a large part, because there's this guard, there's the Typhus Supreme Guard, who are currently allowed to basically just protect the system from the sound of it, and don't have to go and do other guard duties elsewhere.
Wait, but before Typhus, don't we have the Orc world? The ice world of orcs.
Oh yeah. But this is the introduction paragraph. This is a conversation between Warmaster Minitus and somebody else. Admiral Bex, maybe. Yeah, Admiral Bex. But like that entire paragraph is such a really good example. Kind of similar to where you see the generals in the ghosts in the Gaunt's Ghosts, where
they're like looking down at the ants. Yeah,
they're obviously portrayed as, you know, uncaring, like almost malicious kind of superiors. That was just a perfect example though of saying the quiet part out loud.
Yeah.
He's explicitly explaining how evil he is for no reason. He doesn't need to be doing that.
Can I try and fast track us through the ice planet?
Yes, I mean, not
here's
a huge
the thing.
amount happened.
The ice planet is, and I believe my summary of it was: land on an orc world, walk to a place, fight orcs, walk back, and leave.
Oh, you've missed a few things.
The whole chapter is this whole chapter is completely pointless.
You've missed something though, which is one.
What?
We get to see them trudging through the snow, the icy frozen waste. Then we get that contrasted with the guard who are stationed there. It's like, yeah, we know how to. We've got a nice cozy setup here. We have a homoerotic hot spa scene. Then they fight orcs, and we have Cage showing like tactical acumen, and Isn't this where it compares Schaefer against another Penal Legion guy?
It does. Greaves.
Yes.
Do you
And
want to talk about that?
Schaefer suggests in that scene as well that he has a higher calling and a higher authority and just completely ignores the other guy, ignores orders, and just leaves.
The phrase higher calling as well it's a great example of like the way this mystery is being unraveled and how it's depicted to us being badly done. Higher calling? Come on.
I don't know if he actually says that. Like,
I think the word higher calling comes to mind. Somewhere the phrase is used somewhere. Also, in the homoerotic bath scene, it tries to convey Cage's trauma about things by showing how like everything reminds him of some aspect of war. It's not done very well, but he tries.
There's a really weird line of like in a conversation with like one of the Navy officers as well that confused the hell out of me. They're having an argument, and the colonel is trying to get him to do something. I can't remember exactly what the bit was, but what the idea was. But he says, "You spend too much resources moving diplomats and not guard regiments."
Oh,
and the other guy. Guy screams something like.
Here's the ironic thing, that line you're talking about him claiming to have a higher purpose, it's from the little bit of text I wanted to read out.
Oh yeah. Oh, great. Well, should we just... Right, before we do that, what you were saying there, that is basically just Schaefer and the naval officer having a shouting match over who's actually in charge, right?
Yes, but in terms of like, do you know you were describing before how the person wrote on the front of this book, the quote was something like, the characters are realistic, right?
Yes.
Well, the Navy officer comes up with a comeback, and the comeback makes so little sense that I can only put it down to might be something someone actually might say, because this should never be something that made it into like, I guess, a smart quip in your book, if I'm being honest.
It's the sort of thing somebody would say and then regret saying later, like, oh, it sounded like an idiot.
Well, yeah, he's just like, I wish I'd said something else because that made no sense. He's going to be standing in the shower later and he's going to be like, fuck, I could have had a good comeback, and instead I said this. So Schaefer says, you spend too much time and resources moving diplomats and not guard regiments. And the Navy officer comes back with something along the lines of, wait, are you suggesting that we should just be a ferry service? So how does that work?
You shouldn't be a ferry service. You should be. You're suggesting
it should be another type of ferry service.
You're suggesting that rather than being a ferry service, we should be just like a cab service.
A ferry service.
A cab service.
You dare suggest that a magnificent Imperial Navy should be nothing more than a glorified ferry service? Snarled Fleet Admiral Bix. You guard have no idea at all about just how big the galaxy is. Without the Navy, even mighty Terra itself would have fallen thousands of years ago.
Yeah, but he's not criticizing their like army. He's criticizing that they're just ferrying diplomats.
Yeah, he's saying that they're being one type of ferry service when they would be better served being another type of ferry service. Meanwhile, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
it's not a great scene. That was a bit odd.
Yeah.
It felt a bit disjointed.
Sorry,
to go back to the ice planet.
Oh, you know what? I just want to say you've mentioned the thing on the front, that what it said about real people, and I just want to point out it also talked. I'm going to walk back what I said before about uncluttered narratives when I think about this whole like inquisitorial penal legion thing. So I want to walk that bit back as well.
That's the bit you're not supposed to think about, though, wasn't he? If you keep pointing out to these science things and saying you shouldn't think about them, you're not supposed to think about them. Well, that's clearly outside of the plot. Like, there's a very set boundary around the plot that Gav Thorpe wants you to think about.
Yeah, but it's one thing when it's like, oh, is this a physics thing that makes sense? It's another when it's like, oh, what are the rules for how it works? And what the rules are is a mystery, and then when it's revealed, it still doesn't make sense. Anyway, Ice World, Orcs, different penal regiments. Cage is comparing Shepard to the other guy. Jimbus, go.
Their commander couldn't be any more different from ours either. I've never seen Schaefer hit anyone who hasn't tried to attack him first. There's been a few over the years, and they ended up spitting teeth, let me assure you. He despises us all as criminals on principle, but doesn't seem to hate us as individuals, unlike Greaves, who seems to delight in broadcasting his charges of shortcomings and inadequacies to everyone. If I were to sum it up, it's a completely different philosophy. Greaves is all only have to survive a certain length of time and they're out. So he tries to make their lives as miserable as possible while he can. Schaefer, on the other hand, thinks he has a higher purpose. He does not act as our judge, he leaves it to the Emperor. And that means getting us killed, of course. It's like comparing False Hope to Cragmere. One is very obviously a death trap, full of instant death. The other is subtler. Only thinking your life you 1,000 tests of strength and endurance. Both are just as deadly, of course.
So there's a few things here. So one is the fucking lines, if I were to sum it up, it's a completely different philosophy. And also, one is very obviously a death trap full of instant death. Which is that,
probably
the
two worst lines I've ever... Those are probably the worst lines I've ever read in a Black Library book, ever.
Yeah.
There's another scene later on, but there's another like 2 sentences which are next to each other, where it almost seems like he got stuck on a word and he just had to use it like 3 times or something. I think I wrote it down in my notes. I think it's in like the 3rd book, but that was really impressive as well.
Okay. The other thing here is, let me see.
This is it's interesting that he sort of talks about it in this way, though. It's like the colonel doesn't let them go, so he only picks people who he can hold on to basically indefinitely. So, like Cage, people who've murdered repeatedly and would be executed. So, they're now part of the Legion. They don't have a time limit on their service, and we get a previous sense in the scene with Laurie and Lauren that the colonel is going out of his way to look for specific people who he thinks would. He turns up at penal colonies and he goes around and has a look, and then he comes back to the ship with nobody. And Cage is like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Nobody, passed muster, basically. Like I didn't find anyone who I wanted. There was nobody I wanted from this colony."
Yeah.
And they'll do this a few times, or it's mentioned a few times.
Yeah.
So he's clearly looking for people with very specific criteria. Somehow he ended up with 4,000 of them at the beginning, but
then he's been whittling down, and he wants people who are like a higher bar if he's adding anybody new to it now.
Yes, well, we'll find out, most of the people who end up on the final mission who are left after all of this whittling down are actually people who join during the story, and not any of the people from before. They might as well have not existed.
Yeah.
I'm just going to interrupt briefly and point out that on this planet they have quadrupeds called plowfeet.
It's like a Land Before Time name you'd give a dinosaur.
Yes, I was thinking of Littlefoot when I read that.
But also, the guides from that world tell them to put the shit from those animals in their shoes to keep them warm, and he does it because he thinks it might help, which is good, I guess. I just thought I'd note that because it's amusing.
I don't know enough.
Another thing, I'm kind of hilarious at the thought of cold, stoic, edgy, badass Cage putting shit in his boots. Yeah. I think that describes these books perfectly.
So I want to comment on that passage from before. Schaefer despises us all as criminals. As all as criminals on principle, but doesn't seem to hate us as individuals. He absolutely hates them as individuals as well. He constantly is like, you personally don't deserve anything, right? I don't feel like it is that impersonal.
I think at this point in the book, Thorpe is trying to kind of portray Schaefer as a very detached, like very uncaring, he doesn't actually care about their like personal characters at all. All he knows of them really is that they're criminals.
Well, that's all we know of them as well, because none of these people have a personality.
Well, yeah. Maybe that's the case. Maybe Cage is already kind of similar to Schaefer in that way, that he doesn't really notice their personalities.
That's a very charitable view.
Well, you've got to be very charitable in the sense that you could pretend that this entire book is written from Cage's perspective, so we only ever see what Cage is noticing.
Yeah, but it's also written for us to read. That's something you have to remember.
Fair enough. I mean, that's a good point.
Yeah.
I'm not going to argue with that.
So they have the orcs fight, and then Cage pulls out some tactical genius in how they handle it all, and then they go, "Ooh, here's our chance, we're leaving, bye," and they go, right? Something like that.
Yeah. So Cage notices that they're probably being tricked by the orcs, and that it's not just a vanguard unit that is like this small part of the army. They're actually sent off as a diversion so that the real force can go back and attack the base that they're supposed to be protecting. And Schaefer, seeing this as it's almost, from Cage's perspective even, it almost comes across as like Schaefer sees this as the perfect opportunity to basically just get the fuck out. He's like, enough of my people have died. I was only really here to test how good they were at marching through ice.
No, he didn't even want to be there. He didn't even want to be there in the first place, remember?
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. He's just sort of, it's just, he's just like, fuck it, get out. And off he goes. He marches his men back to the base and they just leave. They take the only shuttle off on the base and just fucking...
But after they address the thing, they go, the actual attack's here, and then they actually like report that, and then they deal with it in some way, don't they? And then they're just like, right, and we're off. I think.
I don't think
they left them high and dry.
I don't think they dealt with the final attack, because it comes up in one of the later books. Cage even asks Schaefer, "Do you know what happened with that? What actually happened on that planet?" And Schaefer's like, "I don't know."
But that's the end of like the whole thing. I figured that was like what happened with the bigger picture, whereas they.
I don't think they dealt with the. I don't think they dealt with the York attack.
I didn't get the vibe they left them high and dry there, but I don't know. Okay.
Maybe they did. Maybe they did deal with it. I don't know.
I honestly thought they did leave them high and dry because that would fit in with the B movie. Well, not even just.
But if you want to leave them high and dry, why do you even need to do that whole thing? Why do you even need to have that scene where they figure out here's what the real attack is? If you're not actually then going to be like, well done, now that we figured that out.
Yeah, how did he then order the Navy guy to actually go afterwards anyway? Like, the Navy guys said he wouldn't move in the first place because he said his job was to be there and his orders were to be there. So I don't know.
So I mean, I figured
you get the scene.
But why, if you're just going to have them leave them high and dry, why do you have to figure out, like, oh, this is how we should be handling this fight? Why do you have that moment?
How much better they are.
I think he just sees it as an opportunity. Like, this is what I mean. Like, even from Cage's perspective, it does seem here like Schaefer's basically just gone, oh, I have the opportunity to leave. We should go. And just leaves. Like, on that basis. And I'm pretty sure they don't do
that without that. You could do that without having the scene where you go...
But Gav Thorpe didn't do that without it. He had that scene. So, I mean, he also had to...
Oh my god.
Well, I'm pretty sure they were, because they get back to the base, and I've noted here a scene which I thought was quite funny as well, is that Schaefer goes up to the guy who's guarding the shuttle, the only shuttle that they have to get off the surface, and the guy's like, I can't open it without official orders, and Schaefer's just like, Cage, if the guy doesn't open the gate, shoot him in the face. And Cage is like, okay, I guess. And the guy opens the gate, and they leave.
Cage is like, now this is a sort of order I can get behind. Shooting people I don't have a allegedly strong bond with.
Yeah, it's it's
like an edgy badass again.
So then we get to Typhos, right?
This is a fantastic part of the book. I actually kind of like this part of the book.
I'm about to. Okay, the very start of this, I fucking hated. You have the whole scene where they try and escape. They're just like, oh, we're being escorted from A to B as part of a convoy. And then
that bit was ridiculous.
And then somebody's like, oh, I reckon we could jump out the back of this truck and escape. And then Cage is like, oh, I don't know. And like, oh, we could do it. And Cage goes, oh, okay then. And then they jump out and immediately, like, all the trucks in the convoy are, like, pointing guns at them, like, you, stop trying to escape. And they go, oh, no, we've been caught trying to escape. Like, oh.
No, it was even worse than that.
Oh?
It was even worse than that. They jump out of, like, the only vehicle in their convoy at the back. And they're like, oh, the colonel will never be able to turn around in time to come back for us. so they just run off. And literally, as they start running away, another group of people
There's just a second truck behind them.
Completely unconnected. Yeah,
they're not
this time it does a commissariat.
I'm just going to read this out because it's actually fucking hilarious. Frag, let's do it. I whisper hoarsely before twisting the door handle fully. The emergency exit springs open and I see the black of the road tearing past the opening. Somewhere I hear the roaster's shrill whining. The door must have been alarmed. I take a deep breath and then drop out of the doorway feet first. Thudding down onto the road, my momentum sends me rolling madly, pitching me into a shin-high curbstone. Glancing up the road, I see the others bailing after me, slamming uncomfortably to the road. I jump to my feet and set off towards them at a run. We did it, screams Lynn's Krug, eyes light with joy. There's a few people walking past the pavement, swathed in high-collared raincoats. A couple turn to look at us. Schaefer will never get that thing turned around in time to catch us. Just then there's a screech of air brakes and a black-painted armoured car slews to a halt in front of us. Twin cannons on its roof pointing in our direction. A man jumps out of the back hatch, bolt pistol in hand, dressed in a commissar's uniform. His face is pinched, thin-lipped mouth curled in a sneer. Please try to run, he growls as he walks towards us, bolt pistol held unwaveringly in front of him. It would save me lots of problems.
Yeah, it's just like, hey,
yeah.
Oh, the vehicle immediately behind us in our little convoy. Oh.
what happens when they get to us. Yeah. And they'll do this. And
You know what it required? It required a moment of of complete and utter stupidity. It required a moment of the entire group temporarily losing their brains.
Yeah, and this is something Gav Thorpe does a lot, which drives me insane. All the time, when he wants to create conflict or drama, when he wants to have something happen, it's kind of like that. I can't remember what it is or where it's from, but there's that expression like, if you don't know what to write, a man walks into the room with a gun, right? It's kind of like that. But with Gav Thorpe, it's if you don't know what to write, somebody does something completely inexplicably stupid and unreasonable that you would never expect them to do.
I mean, the worst part about this entire thing is
they just temporarily lose their minds in an attempt to make something happen. We've got to make something happen.
No,
we'll
this is the thing, though. He didn't have to make something happen here. This is the worst part about this entire fucking scene, is that you could remove this entire scene from the book, and it would not change anything. It would not change the way the characters act. It would not change the next part, literally the next exact part of the book. It wouldn't change what people remember, because nobody seems to remember this incident at all. This is completely pointless. This entire section.
In writers' terms, they regard those things as benign tumors, and you can cut it out of the story and nothing is missing. And those are a big plague on bad fan fiction, and bad fiction in general.
Well, it seems
you
to
want
make
proof that this book is bad? That's the most obvious example. There are whole chunks of it that are pointless, utterly pointless. Literally just exist to fill pages.
Oh, there's some fantastic examples later of that too. Usually around action scenes, but this is barely even an action scene. It's like I don't even know what to say about this. If you imagine what would happen after this, right? Well, the fact that nobody remembers this event and the fact that nothing came of it is kind of ridiculous, because what's the next thing that happens? So the commissar's holding them up. The alarm went off. Colonel Schaefer knows that they've tried to escape. He turns the entire fucking convoy around, comes back, and finds them being held at gunpoint by a commissar. Did he just go, whoopsie daisy, I guess you tried to escape. Let's go back to our business, and off they went again. And then nobody remembers this at all.
And that's basically what happens.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens, because nobody mentions it, ever.
It's the only thing this scene accomplishes is to provide me with an example of Gav Thorpe having characters behave unreasonably so something can happen.
Well, here's the thing. You're going to have plenty of opportunities to show this exact same scene in every last one of his books going forward.
Whenever this happens, I'm just going to be like, hey, it's a Gav Thorpe unreasonable man moment. And this is the archetypal, this is a perfect example of it.
You know what it is? The characters catch a temporary case of Gav Thorpe insanity.
You were describing, you described everything about this book in the context of, say, a Nazi exploitation book, right? The problem, the worst part about this scene is that I can actually see it. Whenever I think of this scene, I don't see it now in a 40k universe. I see it in a World War II setting. So they're all in the back of this fucking, one of those standard troop trucks with the tarpaulin over the back, and tarpaulin, and then a fucking one of those armored semi-armored vehicle cars things pulls up with the machine gun on the top with the typical swastika on the front, and an SS officer steps out. It's this is almost like it could have been ripped from one of those movies.
Yeah.
To be honest, he totally ripped it from one of the books, because they made thousands of different Nazi exploitation films. They were not films, books, Pulp Fiction. America made the films, but Van Hessel sold 15,000. Leo Kessler. Here's a fun fact: Leo Kessler was the most popular Nazi exploitation film writer, and he wasn't a hypothetical ex-SS member like Hassel. He was just some guy who managed a supermarket somewhere in the United Kingdom. And in many regards, that's Gav Thorpe too. He's just an average British dude.
Next bit, we get the Mordian scene, and this scene is made out of the first short story mentioned in the Inferno magazine, Last Chance. So that became this scene with the Mordians in this book. So we start off this scene with the Last Chances and Mordians going into war together. We get a nice contrast between them. The Mordians being all almost snobby, oh, look at these, they're all proper in their uniforms, etc. Because they're basically the parade ground aesthetic guard regiment, aren't they?
Well, they're definitely very young. They're a new platoon. So yeah, they're probably the most tip-top shape kind of.
But it's
in terms of parades.
Not even just uniform. That. Just in terms of Mordians as a regiment. just in the lore. They're like the parade ground uniform one.
Oh, I don't know anything about them in like...
Audience in the lore are they're literally based on late 18th, 19th century Prussians. They're brightly dressed, they fight in solid lines, which, let's be honest, in the timeline when you got artillery and stuff is fucking stupid, but whatever.
Yeah, it's just that every army's themed around some sort of existing archetype.
Yeah. Their thing is like Prussian discipline. They are extremely disciplined. They march in columns and lines. They face battle. They face death with like cold disdain, just standing there shooting away, heedless of anything firing at them.
And here we basically get really young Mordians.
Yeah, but do you want to give us a rundown quickly of how we got there?
Well, we got there. We just immediately cut to that after the scene with the where they tried to escape. It just cuts to here. So they're marching into battle alongside them. We get like a few moments of them comparing them before they start getting hit by artillery or shells or something. And in the chaos of battle, Cage ends up like, he opens his eyes and is like, oh, no one's around me, everybody's dead. So Cage decides, here's my chance to escape again. And finds a dead nearby
making the previous scene even more irrelevant.
Yes, absolutely. He finds a dead Mordian, takes his outfit, he goes in and finds a group of traitors, of heretics or whatever.
Yeah, he crawls for a while and then he somehow stumbles into the enemy line. And he makes a comment about this. Mm-hmm. He just accidentally ended up in the enemy line. Oh shit, well, how did I manage this? And then, in almost a sort of, in almost like the perfect accidental hero moment, he stumbles across a plan on hearing the traitor guards talking. A plan that is somehow going to expose a vulnerability in the loyalist forces and allow them to overrun their lines. And Cage, being the hero that he is secretly, although he will deny it, says, "I'm going to have to kill all of them in their sleep." In a very brutal edgelord scene. Which is to come.
Yep. So
it's kind of depressing because I was just reminded that setup is a common setup in the Caiaphas Cain series, and when we get to them, we'll have to compare how Cain does it to how Cage does it here.
The thing with Cage is it's Cain always ends up feeling like I actually have a heart of gold, and I'm telling myself that I'm selfish, but actually I'm like I'm lying to myself about my actual noble intentions. Whereas Cage is like he's a more honest version of that, where he actually genuinely is doing it for himself, kind of, and therefore, but it also makes it feel like a contradiction because it almost doesn't work.
He'll often do heroic things, but when he does heroic things, as I said before, he always underwrites it with, "This is the reason I'm doing it. This is why it's actually selfish."
Yeah, usually. And he doesn't undermine it like Cain does in a way that makes you feel like the contradiction of his character as a person. Instead, it feels like a contradiction in how Cage is written. That's how I'm going to describe that. Cain feels like he's got a contradiction where he's like lying to himself, whereas Cage feels like the contradiction is he's not written well. Yeah,
I think it's like the two different Cains that I talked about before, which is like the one that seems to care about people. Cages, yeah. The one that seems to care about people, and then the one that just like has no feelings for anything ever other than survival.
Yeah. Well, no motivations. He'll feel annoyed and angry at everybody around him while he cares about his own survival. Which, God.
Only seems to care about survival.
Which comes into this next bit, really, doesn't it? So we have we have this, and then he goes, "Ooh, I need to find my way to the front lines now." And these guys, in fact, they're already behind some of our front lines, and we need to go find the other guys, and they're I think this whole scene confused me a lot. The way it was described, I didn't know which way. Is he going backwards? Is he going forwards? It felt like he was, actually, somehow the enemy has slipped in behind our front line. Now I'm going to go back to our front line. What? Okay, now that I've done that, now it's time for me to get out of here. And then for some reason they go forwards. Do they go forward
Yeah,
or do they go backward and find, like,
I think in
the
terms
whole
of location, you weren't supposed to think about it. I think this was just like, enemies are here. I have an opportunity to do something heroic. Then you have a scene where Cage like brutally murders some people in their sleep.
And then in whatever direction I travelled, I found friends. Now I need to go. And in whatever direction I travelled, which way did I go? Am I trying to go backward and finding more? Or am I going forward?
Well, so I think he's running back across no man's land. So there's a really interesting bit here where he's like, he's 70 paces. He works out that he's 70 paces from the traitor guards camp. He's 70 paces to friendly lines. So he marks it out. And he says, if I'm about 30 paces away, I think the snipers will probably see me and start shooting at me. And so he starts sprinting. And he's sprinting. He throws his gun away so that he can sprint even faster. And at about 30, 40 paces, the snipers open up. Now, it says like 20 paces later, so he's getting closer now. He's like, maybe not even 20 paces. He's like, I don't know. He's like halfway or something. Halfway. So he's gone 35 paces, which is probably like 20 seconds at most.
Sure.
20 seconds, they open up mortar bombardment of the area that he's in. So somebody saw this random fucking trooper, this one trooper, running away from their lines, not coming from the enemy lines. Not only were the snipers shooting at him, but then someone went, call in the mortars, we're going to bombard this guy, and they immediately fire. Somebody's sitting there literally with the mortar like in their hand, aiming at that spot already. Or throw the button, immediately ammo's like flying down range. Like, and not only does this happens instantaneously almost, because like there's no fucking time for this. Anyway, he's like running in that typical like fucking World War I scene where there's like artillery coming in and the snipers shooting at him
from the enemy lines towards his own lines. Yeah.
Yes.
And then
now I wanted to bring this up because this has always fascinated me. When I was reading this, I was reminded Dan Abnett wrote World War I type trench warfare in those first Gaunt's Ghost books.
Yes.
How would you compare that to how Gav Thorpe writes World War I trench warfare here?
So in Abnett's one, it felt like there was the chaos of it all, but the chaos of it was communicated in such a way that it was actually written as being the chaos of it. Like, it would have somebody, and even earlier on, Gav managed to do that when he woke up and it was like, I don't know what's going on here. I've just opened my eyes. Everything is blown to hell. Everybody around me is dead. It reminded me of that scene with Kathran in First and Only, where he finds that one guy from the Allied regiment. Reminded me of that a bit. But then as it goes on, we then have a scene where actually, as far as how it's described, everything is played straight, but it just makes no sense and is confusing for me as a reader. It's not portrayed as confusing. It's just bad. It's just confusing because it's badly written, is how it felt.
Yeah, I think Abnett definitely had a better way of keeping like order in what the line of the battle was, like where everything was set up. Like we were seeing it from a third person perspective, which I think grants a little bit of a difference. Like, not everything is focused just on Cage. So you're seeing like he has a bit more freedom to be able to say, about lots of things that necessarily Cage wouldn't be able to see.
But the thing is, as well,
might help a bit in that regard.
But even then, you can, if you have it from first, like when it's following Kathran closely, it's describing how he doesn't know what's going on. For everything after Cage finds that first traitor camp, everything after that feels like Cage knows exactly what's going on. But whatever the hell he knows is going on, we don't know as the reader. Is he going backwards to? Were they behind? Had these guys managed to get past? Confused. Okay, the first traitors. I think he mentions that they are behind the front line. They're managing to infiltrate. But then he goes from them across no man's land to the Allied camp. Then he talks to them and he explains the situation. And I'll go back to this bit in a bit of detail. But then they're like, okay, now I need to leave. So in order to leave, first we need to push through and past these enemies. It's like, what? Why do you need to do that? Why do you need to go across no man's land towards the enemy to leave? Or are you going, what? What direction are you going here? Why?
You sound an awful lot more confused than I think that bit was confusing. So from what I gathered, I think you were right. They were sort of behind the lines. So he thinks he's crawled. Well, he has actually crawled to the enemy lines. If you could imagine, like they're sitting either side of no man's land.
Mm-hmm.
They're not necessarily behind the lines, but like he overhears them talking about a plan to go behind the lines or some bullshit like that.
Okay.
Basically, just a vulnerability. I don't think you really necessarily need to care about what that is. I don't think you're supposed to even think about it really. And then because obviously then he makes the sprint back from the other side of no man's land back to friendly lines and has to deal with the traitor snipers firing at him, leaving their own lines. I don't know what happens there, but like I think the sort of setup of the positioning and things is not that terrible.
But then after that, like what's he do? Okay, after that he says,
well, he's in friendly trenches at that point.
Yeah, and at that point he's like, all right, now I need to make sure I get out of here before everything, like while I've got a chance. So then he charges towards enemy lines? And then after that, it's like, and now we need to go forward again? And it's like, why? Why do you keep on going?
No.
Yeah.
Once he sprints across no man's land,
Yeah.
and then he falls into friendly trenches, and immediately they recognize him as being one of theirs.
Yeah.
Okay, you mean after that?
Yeah. After that, he's like, okay, now that I've set things straight with these guys, I need to get back to a transport before it's too late, because it sounds like everything's about to go to hell.
Well, I mean, there's a huge amount of shit that happens like before there with like the commissar and the squad and all of that shit.
Oh, sure. Like, he's with the squad and they go together. But then after that, it's like, he keeps on talking about needing to, like, being in a hurry to get back to the transport. But then it feels like he keeps on going forward into enemy lines and going, like, one breachhead after another. And it's like, wait, are these between him and the transport? What's going on? It keeps on stressing the urgency of needing to get back to a transport before it's too late. And he keeps on going forward into more enemies.
My interpretation of that was like that he ran out of the trench, and then the only place they could go when they got out of the trench was into cover in some buildings and stuff, and so they were kind of just in the buildings. And I don't think necessarily there was really a direction to it at that point.
But that's my point. There is no direction to it. It's, I don't know. Okay, fine.
I don't think it mattered because he doesn't know what the fuck's going on. He's just trying to get away from like the fact that people are attacking and explosions and all sorts of shit.
That's the point, though. It was never written as if Cage didn't know what was going on. It was written as if Cage did, but from what was given to me as the reader, I didn't know what was going on. But it was never actually written as if Cage was in a chaotic environment and didn't know what was going on.
Maybe, but I'm confused.
It sort of depicted the chaos without actually addressing it.
I'm more confused by this conversation, I think, at this point than I was by the book.
Jimbus, what about you? What was your vibe in this section? You've been quiet while we've been talking
I want to cut parts of this. This is crazy.
I've given up on both of you.
What's your take on that? Did you feel like it was weirdly, confusingly depicted what he was actually doing, going back and forth in those trench lines?
By that point, I had checked out of the book already. I was just reading through it mechanical.
Yeah, I mean, that's you know what?
I didn't pay attention to the directions because that bit wasn't relevant to what was happening in that part of the plot.
Jimbus, that was legitimate.
That entire part
wasn't legitimately me as well.
It wasn't about where he was. It wasn't about the fucking transport. It was about the fact that those kids, it was about his building up the rapport with the kids somehow.
I need to say, I have felt the same way, Jimbus.
We need to talk about the kids, dang it. We haven't talked about the kids.
The last thing I'm going to say is I felt exactly the same way as you. I was like, do I want to go back and reread this to try and understand it? Nope. I'm just going to make a note of this feeling confusing and unclear about what the fuck was going on compared to Abnett. Just purely because compared to Abnett.
Yeah. Again, this is basic. If William King's is a fun B movie and Dan Abnett's is like a quality war film, like say 1917, then this
is some people wandering around in the woods because it's free to film there. You don't need a permit.
Yes.
This is the Blair Witch Project in the World War I.
Don't drag the Blair Witch Project down.
This is a bad B movie by someone who's.
This is no budget. We had no budget, so we filmed in the local park's woods because we didn't need a permit.
No, here's the thing.
We don't have
I would say if this was a B movie, they had a budget. They just didn't have anyone who knew what the hell they were doing, which is the honest truth. Gav Thorpe had no idea what the hell he was doing. He was someone who had never put a novel together, putting a novel together, and it shows.
But the thing is, this short story was a short story, so maybe he didn't want to change much of it at all. Maybe he thought he could just slot it in without having to worry anything.
He mentioned he changed some stuff to make it fit, but I don't know what he changed. I didn't go back and find Last Chance and read it. So yeah, so the Mordians, the kids.
Yeah, so he falls into this trench, and he's immediately recognized as a Mordian because he's wearing a Mordian uniform. And, suddenly, it's almost hilarious, actually, because it's like one of those scenes where the camera shifts perspective, and suddenly the entire room is full of people, and you never realized because the camera wasn't...
Oh, it's like that scene from Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome.
Yeah. So he falls into the trench, and he sort of sits up, and, as he's realizing, we're also, the camera pans around, and suddenly we see that there's a commissar, there's, 5 fucking troopers, and even the sergeant is all just in the trench with him.
So if I remember right, first he's like, I'm a Mordian, and then they're like, who are you? And then they're like, I've never heard of you. And then he goes,
he says
I'm actually yeah, but then I've never heard of you, and he's like, well, I'm actually a special operative. Yeah, who's making his way back. He tells
the commissar, after the commissar comes up and realizes that his name tag doesn't match his actual name that he gave, he tries to convince him that he's a special operative.
And the commissar's like, yeah, okay. I'm pointing my gun at you. We're going into over no man's land now. So they They go into no man's land.
Some shit happens then, and then instead of like taking him by gun, the commissar leaves an entire squad of like green.
Does he? I don't think so. I thought they went into no man's land, and then the commissar gets shot, and then they're all left with Cage.
No. This is before. Like they're in because they're all in the trench still, and because there's a scene, another scene that is very jarring considering Cage's character, where he gets a premonition, and he tries to pass it off as and it may have been that at the time this was just passed off as experience, but later on this is used by Thorpe as an indication that he was a psyker. So he gets a premonition about an artillery strike. And he says to this group of squad people who are all like listening to his story as he tells them who he is and what he's been doing, and tells them about the Penal Legion to scare them, almost like to scare them straight, because he cares that they don't end up in the Penal Legion, which is another Cage.
And he's talking about his background and why he is in the Penal Legion.
Yes, so we find out a lot about Cage here.
And this is where you can feel like, okay, I can see why this was its own short story. This is him coming in, he's finding these guys, and he's like, oh, you want to know about real tough guys and what we get up to? Here's what I did.
Yeah, so it's the Fireside Story setup, but in a different way.
Yeah, it is. That's exactly it. It's a little Fireside Story.
Anyway, so this artillery strike is coming in, and he shouts at them to move because he knows what's about to happen, and they don't listen to him. So he shouts in his like commanding voice, and suddenly they all jump across the trench because they're all so green that they're even willing to take commands from people who are their prisoner. And in doing so, he saves all of their lives, and he seems pleased by that because he seems to care, which is another very jarring position for Cage's character, because this is probably one of the few instances where that will ever come up, because he will not care about anyone ever again.
Oh, especially not for the rest of his scene.
He
starts treating not only. All right, so first off, the commissar comes back then, does he? And then they go into no man's land, and then he gets shot. Is that
so?
Right?
The commissar comes back and they go for an attack, I think.
Yeah,
and he's like, "We're going to push over
the walls." It's a
and then almost immediately, the commissar eats it.
He turns around and looks at the commissar, and I was left for a moment thinking, is Cage going to shoot him? And then he just gets shot. It's like, okay, fine, we'll keep going. No complaints from me.
Yeah, I know. Cage puts him out of his misery.
Oh yeah.
Worth noting, because this is used to show another like of Cage caring, because the commissar looks at him and says,
"You know what that scene was? That was the scene from Starship Troopers where Rico had to shoot Major Rajak."
Well, the commissar looks at him.
You know what to do. Do it, Rico. It's literally that scene copy pasted.
He looks at him. The guy looks at Cage and he says, "For once in your life, you miserable penal scum, do something worthwhile or something." And Cage just like shoots him. Like,
and it was so obvious. I'm like, Thorpe, do you really want to get sued?
No, you can get away with that. That's an
homage.
It's an homage, and also it's quite
more than that. It's lazy. It is extremely lazy.
Yes.
Well, they had to get the commissar out the way, because then all of the troopers, the green troopers, needed somebody to lead them now, because they didn't have anyone to lead them, and so, being a lieutenant, even of a penal legion, they immediately fall under his wing and try to follow all of his orders, which he has no intention of giving and wants to run away.
No, he does give orders. He basically flatly tells them to their faces, I only, listen up everybody, I only care about my own survival, I'm just going to use you as meat shields to get out. And they go, okay, that sounds good to us.
Please, sir, please use us as meat shields. Yeah. It's really fucking weird. That's the entire scene is really strange, because he tells them maybe 3 or 4 times throughout the scene that he hates them, that he wants nothing to do with them, that he hopes that they all die, and as long as he survives, they're dying for a great cause. And
they just do.
They're all fine with that, and they're super happy by it. And the fact that he's giving them any orders at all seems to make them super pleased. And then they will obviously save him in the end.
And then the scene wraps up eventually with, they're like, all right, finally, all of this is sorted. Let's climb up out of this trench. Oh, someone's giving me a help. Oh, it's Colonel Schaefer.
Schaefer in the middle of the battlefield, in the middle of the war zone.
Find their way back over to him. Schaefer's
not even the last chances. He's on his own.
No, he's not. The others are all there. Schaefer says, I'm going to shoot you for trying to run away. And everybody else behind Schaefer goes, no, you're not, and points their guns at Schaefer.
No, because it's the rookies that save It's the
Is
rookies
it?
that save Cage.
Is it?
Yeah.
I thought it was Last Chances.
This is the thing. The last chances aren't there because he leads Cage to the last chances afterwards, and they're just like, Colonel Schaefer ran off into the war zone because he heard where you were and went to go find you. And this is the crazy thing about the scene. After all of the shit that Cage says to them, the rookies are willing to point their gun at a colonel to stop the colonel executing Cage.
I thought it was Last Chances who were like, no, you can't kill our buddy. I'm making this up.
Definitely the rookies. That was what made the scene like crazy.
Okay, I mean the thing is, that makes it crazy in one way. I thought it was the other way, and then it was crazy that everybody just did that, and then it just moved on as if that never happened. I thought it was crazy.
They would never do that in any other situation, but would just do it there. Yeah.
Yeah, and also they're just going to move on, and like it would completely undermine Schaefer's authority, and
yeah, no,
because
you're
they
right.
could just leave that at any point. And
that would actually be even crazier.
And that was how I read it, and that just kind of made sense and was in keeping with how the rest of this book was written to me.
That would have been even more insane. That would have, as you said, like completely undermined the characters for like quite the rest of the book.
Yeah.
But let's be honest, all the characters don't undermine themselves.
Yeah.
Well, I find it almost like in terms of an overall thing, I find it inexplicable that Colonel Schaefer has not been shot in the back. Like there has to be
he's that much of a badass.
So you cannot have a legion of 4,000 people, all of which are criminals. So perfectly capable of control and rational risk management, right? Being criminals and all that. And you can't have any of those that didn't go, I don't actually fucking care, right? I'm just going to shoot him in the back. He ruined my life. He pulled me into this fucking like complete mess every time. He's clearly trying to kill us. What does it matter if I just shoot him in the back?
Yeah.
Like, how could you possibly have 4,000
Cage constantly
people
wants
like
to,
that?
and then he just like goes, oh no, I won't do it.
Yeah, well, clearly Cage is thinking about that. What if you come across someone who has less decision like control or less like risk assessment?
Nah.
Or Cage would know, and then he'd stop them because he's cool.
So, look, moving on from this.
Anyway, the rookies save him, and
they see Cortanaro. They get
the colonel being held at the colonel's held at gunpoint by all of these rookies, and then eventually he just sort of shrugs and leaves.
And then they do just move on as if it didn't happen. So
it's almost like Cage like accepts the fact that not Cage. It's almost like Colonel Schaefer accepts the fact that Cage was able to literally win over this entire squad of Imperial guards while being their prisoner in about 10 minutes, and just goes, you know what? I'm actually impressed by that. I'll let you have that one.
This is a charitable interpretation, but it's not too charitable. Let's go with it. The internal logic checks out. Next, they see Cortanaro, which is surrounded by a moat of acid, like some sort of like cartoon villain fortress.
Skeletor.
He meets up.
Yeah.
He meets up again with the Last Chances. There's another homoerotic locker room scene where they joke about his cock in some way or another. I can't remember what it was. They were talking.
Something about artillery and gunpowder. Yeah, right on. They make that joke like 3 times, I think, over the course of the series.
Yeah. It's mostly just in this book, I think. Anyway, then they go, all right, here's our actual mission. All of this time, all of this was just me testing and whittling you down. And at this point, it's basically revealed that, the pilot who had a stroke, probably actually just Schaefer shot him, maybe, to make the plane crash.
Yeah, that seemed to be implied, yeah.
Yeah. The Eldar spy, it wasn't Roland, it was actually Schaefer tipping off the Eldar as a test.
Oh, that one is fucking crazy. Like, the idea that Schaefer just sort of just went, oh yeah, by the way, Dark Eldar, you can come and attack this convoy.
The only thing which wasn't just an intentional test was the Orc planet, at which point he's like, no more testing. We're leaving. Yeah,
because Schaefer apparently also heard about something weird called the God Plant and thought it would be fun to run into. It's almost like this was like I see this as Thorpe's way of tying all of the short stories together and the little clips that he made, and be like, right, so there has to be a reason why all of these things keep happening to these fucking people over and over again, because otherwise this is so inconvenient.
Oh, yeah.
So
lazy story.
This all happens. We get a scene where he goes, all right, everybody, this is it. This is the mission. This truly is your last chance. And here's your pardon. You can have it signed by me if you partake in this last mission. Otherwise, you can go and join the other penal legion over there. And one guy,
the Baron
goes, well, your mission sounds like a suicide mission. I'm going to say no. And then Schaefer deliberately slowly, methodically tears up his pardon, and then he goes, anybody else? And everybody else is like, no, we'll come with you.
It's not even that. It's not even just that, though, wasn't it? He tears it lengthwise. It's described incredibly meticulously.
Yes.
He tears it lengthwise, then he folds it over, then he tears it again, then he folds it over, he tears it a few more times, then he scrumples it up, then he tears it a bunch, then he throws it on the floor, then he grinds it under his heels so that it's non-existent. It's like, what the fuck is going on here?
Yeah.
You two missed that whole scene where Emperor's blood, the hunter has become the hunted. Emperor willing, I'll catch you yet.
Wait, what?
The scene where they're hunting a gene stealer. You know, the one in between.
Oh, God. Yeah. It's another one of these things. There's just been more of these, it was almost like a clever girl type moment with the Inquisitor hunting a gene stealer, which is revealed what that is in a minute. So, in fact, I think it's revealed what that is now. It's revealed that the reason they're going to be infiltrating Coritanorum, which they've said it's impossible to do a full frontal attack. Only a small crack team of people can get in. And they've been planning this for a year or two. And the Inquisitor, this whole thing of him whittling them down has been a plan to infiltrate Coritanorum that's been ongoing for they've literally been in 2 years' time, we're going to infiltrate it. Schaefer, do you think you could go whittle down from 4,000 people to a crack team of 10 in the next 2 years, and then we'll do this plan? Yeah, sure.
So I don't know how long.
And then there's the other ticking clock. They have to destroy the city soon because it's Gene Stealer infested, and it's bringing High Fleet Dagon towards the planet.
Yes.
So I don't know how long the little snippets that we get before each chapter are supposed to take.
What time period are they happening over? I think the first one is set 2 years ago or something. It's when, oh no, it's loose. Because it's revealed
I kind of get the impression that all of them were set before.
I thought some of them were now. Maybe. I don't know. Yeah, that might make sense.
I mean, he's clearly having his fucking.
Don't forget the scene we didn't talk about, which is the scene where ships of High Fleet Dagon are hovering above a planet they're eating.
So I think I just phased out most of these clips because I only remember one or two of them, and you were right, wasn't he? I thought maybe there was less of them than you thought, but you're right. There's one in front of every chapter, and I don't even remember half of them. They seem so irrelevant.
The Inquisitor's up to playing hide and seek with a gene stealer over a few years. Other things are happening. Yeah, okay. So full frontal assault on Coritanorum is doomed to fail, so they're going to infiltrate it. After the dramatic tearing up of the Baron's pardon, everybody else goes, yep, we'll join. Then also, just to be super edgy and grim, it turns out that the Baron's penal legion was sent into a full frontal assault on Coritanorum as a diversion.
And not even that.
Oh, God. But, you know what you missed? You're talking about the dick joke, and our female, Laurie, says that his dick is more of a sidearm than artillery.
There we go. That was it. That was it. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's not even just that they send the Baron's Legion into a full frontal assault. They send him into an artillery strike. Not an artillery strike. Not just an artillery strike. A naval bombardment.
No. That's separate. That's separate. The naval bombardment happens on one side, which is the side where they then pass through where the naval bombardment was to get in, to get to the side door. The full frontal assault is happening from a different direction.
Oh, I thought he even pointed back later on, and Cage was like, "Oh shit!" It looked like he would have hated to have been the Baron in the naval bombardment, because that scene is actually kind of funny. I like that scene because they introduced this naval artillery guy, and
who is he's like a whimsical little child.
Yeah, and he stands on the top of this cliff, almost embankment, and he just stands there, silhouetted by the naval bombardment explosions in the background, like the scene from Iron Man where Tony Stark turns around and there's this huge fucking explosion in the background.
It makes it sound like he's just uncomfortably close. He's just really close, and the bombardment keeps coming towards him, and then it stops in just the right place. He's like, "Yeah, we're good at this."
So. Yeah, I don't know how often he does that, but he gets unlucky with a stray stone traveling at several hundred miles an hour, and he's just going to have his head just blown into mist by the bombardment while he's standing there on top.
That doesn't matter, for he is a whimsical boy.
He's pretty much.
And he then is like, "Oh, can I come with you guys? That sounds fun." And they go, "Yeah, okay." Don't know why, but okay, fine.
Because this is what Schaefer does. Like Schaefer, every time Thorpe introduces a character, which Thorpe seems to like, and like writes them in a very, as you said, in this case, whimsical or edgy or interesting manner at least. Schaefer will just be like, "You're not one of the team," and whether they have a choice or not will depend on the situation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So they sort of drift in and out of behaving infantile from this point. That Navy guy. But anyway, they go across this bombarded area.
When they go into the what was
inside.
it called? Do you remember the name of the door?
What's it called? Fuck. Oh, I'm really annoyed at this. Postern door.
What was it? Postern door, yes.
The one you call a fucking vent from Amogus in the other podcast, you fucker. That's not what a postern door is. Anyway.
So somebody makes a joke about that door, which made me laugh, though, because the door is... I remember the days when you could leave your doors unlocked. Like, they're just broken in through the postern door, and like they find like a door or something they need to go through, and it's locked. So somebody like has to pick it or blow it open or something. And I think it's Laurie makes that joke. I remember the days when you could leave your doors unlocked. This seems like a huge fucking breaking of the fourth wall. It's just sort of like inserted in here because it's a joke that maybe at the time when this book was written would make sense. It probably would even make sense as a joke today. But how the fuck does this make sense in universe? There's a scene coming up though which we have to talk about because this scene is something special.
So I want to say before we get in, at this point we start seeing signs of the Inquisitor, although it's not made clear at the time, where we start seeing like, oh, this whole guard entrance here, everybody's dead. Like,
oh yeah.
There are just sections of the fortress where a bunch of people have just been killed in a sneaky gas attack by the Inquisitor. But wherever something would be an inconvenient barrier for them to surmount, there's just a whole bunch of dead bodies where the Inquisitor has taken care of the problem for them.
Yes, yeah. But they describe their like passage through this fort, and this fort is like absolutely like astronomically large. So it takes them like literally, I think it's days to get through. I think they sleep at one point in like a forgotten barracks or something. And
and nobody notices all these people who've died in gas attacks.
No.
In those few days.
Anyway, but we get to this scene, right? And this scene is something special because we have Cage and we have a bunch of, like, yes, they're criminals, but they are pretty much part of the Imperial Guard. And we have this Inquisitor working with, like, potential commissar, definitely a colonel in the Imperial Guard, leader. Anyway, they go into this room. And they find this woman who's just minding her own business in this room.
Is this? Oh, I know what this is. This is the scene. I've got a note about this. The note says the scene where he strangles a civilian. Oh my god, so edgy.
Yeah.
Yeah. That sounds up.
So the scene happens like
we can't let the civilian be alive.
I did don't forget what he says after that. Was it? I look down at her pleasant face, purple from the choking now, and I don't feel anything. No guilt or remorse. Inside, another human part of me seems to die. That was too extreme, Laurent said with a doubtful look as I peeled myself off the bed.
But like the way it happens as well is it's just so fucking ridiculous. Like one of them grabs the woman from behind and is like holding her to make her quiet so that she doesn't like scream or anything. And she's like, "What the fuck is going on? Why is there like a bunch of Imperial like guards?" Well, she thinks they're the enforcers from inside she thinks they're like the traitor guards that we see around the fort. And like Cage is having this inner monologue about, well, what are we going to do? She obviously we can't keep her. We can't like hide her. We can't tie her up. She'll be found and all this random shit as if the body's just going to disappear after they strangle her to death, by the way. Anyway, Colonel Schaefer just sort of nudges his head and goes, "Cage?" And Cage immediately is just like, "Okay, boy." Like, come on, we go. It's like, what the fuck is this?
Wasn't there? It was Gutsman. He said she's already dead, and then the Colonel looked at him and just gave her a nod.
Yeah, that was it. And the Cage just immediately just like jumps it. It was like, okay, here we go then.
Oh, there's also they go in. They've revealed that we're not going to shut down the reactors, we're going to overload them, right? The implication being, okay, well, because they're going to overload the reactors, this is like they're blowing the whole place up, not just shutting it down so that they can invade. right? And we get another case of smart person versus stupid person. Oh, we forgot to mention, they got a tech priest here somewhere along the way. They got a tech priest now in the Penal Legion.
They got a 250-year-old tech priest who had all his implants pulled out of him when
he was like slowly dying because he's basically everything he needs to live is pulled out. Yeah, fine. Anyway, so we have a scene where he is the wise sage teacher and Laurie is the idiot. Call me stupid, says Laurie, sitting on the edge of a bed, but I still don't see where this is going. We kill the power by overloading the reactors, not shutting them down. So what? Goodman sighs heavily and lowers himself onto the bed next to Laurie, weariness in every movement. Let me try to explain in terms you might understand. Every single person reading this has at this point seen we're not going to shut down the reactors, we're going to overload them, and has gone, oh no, that means that it's a one-way mission, right? It's exploding. Oh, yeah. Fuck. Everybody has read that and understood that. And Thorpe has not only assumed that the reader is too stupid to understand this and decides to go further explaining it. The person who it's being explained to, he has the tech priest basically sit down and be like, let me try and explain this in terms like an idiot might get. To this, like, just absolutely just insulting to the reader. Like, this taking these doesn't just take the extra steps, he explicitly has them call the reader's viewpoint, who he's explaining it to, a dumbass.
Well, there's actually
the reader's not imprinting themselves on the that character. They're just
But that's the point. The reason that this scene is here is because it's exposition to make sure the reader understands it. And the exposition here is delivered to Laurie. And Laurie doesn't fucking get it at a point any reasonable person would. And Gav Thorpe says, we need to keep explaining this to make sure the reader understands it. That's the creative decision there. And then he just has them just basically call Laurie a simpleton for needing it explained.
There's an even more incredible scene like that that's coming up very shortly.
It's the one about lies told for people in power.
No, it's the one about the gas.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. Tell me about the gas.
Before you two go forward, I just want to point out that one of my favourite things was when they get into the city, we come across some kind of marketplace, a huge open space full of stalls, many of which seem to be closed down. I guess there isn't too much to sell, really, as Coratorium is under siege.
Yes.
It made me take a spit take when I read it.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, shit. That's something.
This book is so full of, obvious, some of the most worst examples of Captain Obvious, or trying to make a funny quip or something, and it just comes off horribly.
Okay, Schaefer didn't tell them that everything was a test yet. He tells them now.
This is where he does it.
Yes, I've got a note here.
He does this in the middle of this fucking mission, which can't fail. It is the most important thing ever. Schaefer has been building up to this forever. Now is the time to basically say, I've been fucking literally just taking the piss and
he needs to do that. He needs to do that.
Missions for the last 2 years.
Yeah, he needs to do that so they understand just how dedicated he is to this and how important it is. It's important.
I'm so dedicated to this mission. Yeah. I have been fucking with you over and over and over.
Yeah, we planned this 2 years ago.
Just make sure that you're the best. You need to make sure you're the best. Now you're the best, and now you can do this mission that only you can do.
Yeah.
There's a billion situations in these coming scenes where if anyone had been slightly injured, if anything had gone wrong, remotely, slightly, it would have doomed the entire mission. And he keeps throwing in these situations where they couldn't possibly hope to succeed every time. Mm-hmm. And yet it's only because they succeed every time this mission is even possible.
Some of it is some of the who survived and who dies. It just reminds me of the joke of the joke about a recruiter going, I only hire lucky people, and throwing half of the CVs in the bin. You know? It's like that.
Yeah. Very much like that. It's insane.
I have a note here. There is a thing that happens in a lot of 40k books, and I think this might be one of the first examples of it. This is a book that has a character go, I'm from a hive, so I'm naturally really good at things when I'm underground and in enclosed spaces. This is something that happens.
I'm naturally very good at navigating.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch that happens in the Kane books a lot. And I think this might be the first book where that happens. Someone goes, I'm from a hive, so I'm good at underground stuff.
I can see this being kind of reasonable, though.
That's reasonable.
The way it's described.
That's entirely reasonable, but it's just it's a thing that comes up loads in Black Library. It's reasonable.
Is it because
But
do
I
you get a
just thought-
bonus in Dark Heresy if you are from a hive world to like navigation or something?
Probably. I don't know. But it's like I don't know. I just thought that was interesting that this is the first example of that. I think. I
Okay,
think
that's
this
fair.
is the first example of that. Because
So
it is
in the
something
third book, they
like
actually-
any fucking character whose background is I'm from a hive, you can bet that if they ever end up underground in a tunnel or like in a claustrophobic city, they'll be like, good thing I'm from a hive, so I'm good at navigating this. In any fucking story, you can bet they'll have a line about it.
They kind of describe in the third book a little bit about why he's good at navigating hives and stuff. So they talk about like, the fact that he sees things. He'll see like little sort of like this has got a fallen sign or something like that, and he'll remember that, and you can like piece it back together when he's going around and stuff like that.
It's entirely
Or
reasonable.
The smells and everything are like different regions smell differently. And
That's basically it. Yeah, I don't know. It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's just that it's a very common trope in a 40k book. If someone's from a hive world, they let you know the second they're in a cave.
So, is this the point in the story we were introduced to Inquisitor Oreo?
Yes.
Not
Oreo.
quite yet. Not quite yet. The
Oreo.
first thing I want to point out is there is another wise teacher, dumbass person having it explained to them about people who are basically it explains the concept of sometimes people are fighting because their leader tells them that they're on the right side. And it's oh my god, no!
Yeah.
It was bad enough that I wrote a note about it.
Thorpe was setting
You know
up.
what the
this
thing
kind
about
of,
that was? There is a scene that like reminds me of these Nazi exploitation books. Very much so.
I'm glad.
That was
I
one
wrote
of the
that
biggest
note.
defenses at the Nuremberg trial was like, we were just following orders. So
Yeah.
I mean, it makes perfect sense.
It's not even
I get
just
the
that we were
impression
following orders.
that-
It's like some of these people might not even realize that they're on the wrong side because their propaganda says that they're fighting for the emperor
Yeah,
and the opponents are chaos. And it's just like, and then it does the same thing. It takes it explains it a few more steps further beyond what
Thorpe does that all the fucking time.
In
Which
this
is like
book.
go too far in the explanation when you don't know. It's in all of them, I think.
All
Like,
three of you, mainly the first one. It gets better.
But yeah, like he sets it up though. He sets it up subtly a few times, and you're like, "Oh, that's cool." I kind of like the idea that they don't know, because the whole point is the place they're trying to blow up. It's a command headquarters.
Yeah, they had mentioned before that there was this whole thing of like it had been like mentioned that there are like blurred lines about who's fighting for who, and you don't know what you're up against when you find somebody in a no man's land. That had been mentioned before.
But
In a nice
the reason this
way.
place is so dangerous and they have to get rid of it is because it's a corrupt command headquarters. So
By gene
they're giving
stealers.
orders.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, by gene stealers. So they're giving orders and shit, and like they could be, confusing the fuck out of the entire like command structure.
Mhm.
So yeah, there's that, but then they get to the generators, right, and then Oriel appears.
Yeah.
And Oreo command like Inquisitor Oreo turns up. If you wanted to tell
I don't remember his actual name. We'll go with Oreo.
Oriel. It's Oriel.
How's that? Is that Oriel?
Oriel.
They meet him. What was that he said about a gas scene?
Okay, so when they're defending, so they get to the generators, and the idea is it's like a capture the flag mission or capture the point mission in a game. They get there, they have their tech priest, they have to let the tech priest plug himself into this machine, and do his fucking business for like 5 minutes, and they have to
It's
defend
basically
it.
a video game
Yes.
final boss.
It's
scene.
like-
They have to defend the choke point, which there's only one way in, and they have to defend this choke point while he does this job, right?
While he
And-
arms the bomb.
Yes.
I
And
mean,
so they
plasma
keep
reactors.
attacking. They keep attacking with guns. They try to shoot grenades in, at which point the colonel shouts back something like, "Are you idiots trying to blow up the reactor?" At which point they stop using grenades because they apparently don't know they're there to blow up the reactor, which they make a point of even saying, which is okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
And anyway, and then somebody points out, Cage thinks something like, gas. Right, so gas was the first thing I thought. Why don't you just gas the fuck out of them, right? They're stuck in this one room. There's only one way in. Just throw a bunch of gas in. You must have gas, surely, because you're like everything is World War One in this sort of Imperial Guard.
And also, they've just found a whole bunch of people who are gas attack victims on their way in.
Yes, although that is actually relevant. So that's actually kind of funny because that is actually relevant, which is the one thing I liked about this description scene. So Cage thinks this gas or fire. This could be two problems because gas would be fine, fire maybe not so much with the reactors. And then Oriel goes through this incredibly lengthy explanation for why they will not gas us because the distribution network of the pipes allows the gas to dissipate into the surrounding corridors. And I'm like, well, that's not the best reason why they couldn't. And he's like, but also They don't have any gas anymore because somebody used it all. I was like, wow, okay, that's actually kind of good because
That's fine.
Like,
I also need to
make
point
it
out
like
that in this scene, Cage gets his upgrade because he's using a bolter.
Oh, that's right.
Oh.
On their way into there, they find a room which has like a bunch of weapons, and he's like, "What's this weapon?" And the tech priest is like, "Ah, that's the special weapon. Here is how you use the special weapon." And then he has the special weapon. He has like the OC's special gun.
It's described as like, being like, and the guy, the tech priest is with him, is like, I once worked on the manufactorum for this device.
He's just like,
And it's just a bolter. It's a Space Marine bolter.
Is it?
Yeah,
I
it's
remember
literally described as a bolter. He's armed with a bolter.
I remember it having some really weird, funky shit going on.
It's not a Space Marine bolter because the guy says that it fires 1,000 rounds before the prism needs resetting, which is not part of a bolter. That's part of a lasgun, surely.
Yeah, it's got some sort of prism thing. It sounded high tech. It didn't sound like shoot explodey bullets.
No, he is a bolter. The thing you're talking about is the Fractrix pattern assault laser.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of. That's what we're talking about. Isn't that what he picked
that's
up?
What Cage has.
Yeah, Cage picked that up, I thought.
Cage picked up a bolter.
Who picked up the assault laser?
No, absolutely not, because at some point later on, Cage says, I must have fired my 1,000 rounds because the gun stopped working.
Yeah, because he picks up a bolter.
Who would have picked up the assault laser then? Who are you thinking picked that up?
It was Cage.
Yeah,
Cage
I know. I thought
laser.
it was Cage. Jimbers, who did you think picked that up?
Oh, I knew it was Cage. He picked up a bolter after that.
After that. Yeah. So this whole thing in the arming room this whole thing in the arming room was the special assault rifle thing, and then after that he gets a bolter. Yeah, assault laser. Yeah, it's like the most special and weird high tech las gun, which then never exists again in the lore. It reminds me a bit. That gun reminded me a bit. There's one or two things in this story that reminded me of William King's Space Wolf books, where it was like, you wouldn't see that in modern 40k. One of them was that gun. There was also a mention to some volcanoes called Korn's Twins or something.
Right at the beginning.
Korn's Twins.
Love it.
Yeah, it was like, I thought it reminded me very much of Space Wolf, where they just sort of throw one of the Chaos God names in there randomly.
There's the Gorechild War. Yeah.
But also there was, when they were on the planet, one of the mountain ranges, I think, is also called after one of the Chaos Gods.
Huh, was it? Okay.
And I remember, and it's like Slaneshi something, or I don't know, I can't remember. Something like that, I think.
Okay. Yeah, so we have all that. Then they managed to do the thing that they successfully protect their secure the objective target for like 5, 10, I don't know, it's like 2 hours or something.
He goes into the detailed explanation of what he has to do. He's like, I've got to disable all of these 9 gates and all of the overlocks.
So then they get out. Then they get out, and it's like, oh no, the override. There's an override. Oh, how could this happen?
A failsafe. There's a failsafe I missed.
There's a failsafe I missed. And then oh, what? Where is it? And he's like, oh, it's probably that corridor back over there marked energy distribution. I didn't think it mattered. And you fragging idiot, Lauren swears, grabbing him and slamming his back into the wall. You useless old man. Fucking silly description of his rage over this guy who's like, oh, I was setting these fucking plasma reactors to explode. I didn't think that energy distribution room would matter. Okay, whatever. Was this another example of the scenes where Cage, having had the plan go almost perfect, but then fuck up at the last moment, immediately is just like, plans failed, we're leaving, and just like tries to force the issue and tries to leave immediately, and then Colonel Schaefer has to like talk him down and basically hold him at gunpoint to make him stay again. Yep.
Because this will happen another 3 times throughout the series.
So they go back, they deal with the energy distribution. If I remember right, Goodman's dies, but then they go to the energy distribution thing and do it anyway, I think.
Yes. I think they just blow it up.
Difficult to tell what's going on at this point anymore.
Then Lauren's like, hooray, and then he gets shot because he's just kind of walking backwards into an open hallway. Laurie goes into rage mode, and like,
it's worth noting that she just runs off. She takes the gun and she runs away.
Wait, no. Cage tries to stop him, stop her, and I think she like kicks him in the nuts or something and leaves, something like that.
I don't remember exactly how she does it, but yeah, she like stops him and then she stops him from like grabbing her. And then
also, it like he's got a really weirdly creepy description of her, talking about like the blood on her alabaster skin. It's really like something about the way he described it, like was like, ugh. So then she runs off, and Schaefer's like, no, Cage, we have to leave, like you said a minute ago, remember? And then they go. They get to the... they end up separated, and Cage gets the opportunity to leave on his own. It's like, no, I have to wait for the Colonel. And then the Colonel shows
one of them,
up.
yeah. So Cage is sitting in the ship, and it goes through this like ridiculously long-winded like decision process. And his main thought is like, fuck the Colonel, I'm just leaving. Because at this point, it's literally only Oriel, Cage, and the Colonel, and the Navy guy, I think. Are they the only people?
The Navy guy lived, I think. Someone lived. Somebody else. There's one other.
Somebody else was there. Anyway, like Cage is in the ship on his own, and he's like, I could leave right now. And he comes to the decision that, no, he can't leave. And he rationalizes why he still doesn't like the Colonel, and he's still being a dick and self-preservation. Is he like, if I don't have the Colonel, then
he needs him to sign the pardon.
He can't sign my pardon,
yes.
and I won't be free.
It's like, fine. That's fine. Then the Inquisitor shows up, and he's like, something you said before wasn't... He goes like fucking... He goes... What's his name?
Do you know how he made this like deduction? Because this came out of fucking nowhere for me. He just... Because like obviously we know because we've seen all of the snippets. How the fuck does Cage come to this conclusion?
He goes...
Then is also the...
what's his name?
The fact that he...
What's that detective show? What's his name? The guy... Oh, fuck. The American guy. One last thing.
Columbo? Columbo.
Yeah. Columbo. He does like that. It's like
one of the greatest comments.
He's like, one last thing. You said this. What did you mean by that? And then the guy's like, I misspoke. He's like, I don't think you did. Fuck you, you're not getting on the ship. Kicks him off. Leave. And it's like, oh, yes. He's just like murdered he's just basically killed an Inquisitor.
Cage deduces this entire like situation where like the Inquisitor lost control of this gene stealer and they were studying it. He pulls all of this out of nowhere. And Oriel is just like,
he doesn't deduce the whole thing. He deduces enough to say you're responsible, doesn't he?
Well, he says like, I bet you were studying it or something. And Oriel, instead of going like, what the fuck are you talking about? He says, we had to know what was going on. It's just like, what? This is an Inquisitor. Yeah. What the fuck?
So then he kicks the guy.
He's a psychic Inquisitor.
Yeah. So then he basically. This is like.
No, here's the thing. You got a thing. Cage steals the Inquisitor's bolt pistol from his belt. Like, filches it while they're talking. Although it doesn't describe it, because I tell him, folding my arms, he says, stand aside, and then smashes. Oh.
Yeah, he punches him in the face or something, and then kicks him down the ramp.
Yeah, this is like the ramp's down.
I also love it.
Gone.
But then there's also 4,000 dead Lance Chancers, unfortunate. 3.5 million dead Typhons, unfortunate. 1 million Guardsmen from across the sector, unfortunate. Risking 50 worlds, unfortunate. You could never understand. To defeat the Tyranids, we must study them. There's more than a few million people at stake here, more than 50 worlds. The whole of the Imperium mankind could be wiped out by these beasts. They must be stopped at any cost.
And at this point, and Cage has this whole time, he's basically been talked up to like, look, if all of these people in this city have to die for the greater like purpose of the Imperium, I don't want to use the phrase the greater good, but yeah, then so be it. And like this is explained to him, and he like comes to accept this. And then the Inquisitor's just like, this is about the whole galaxy, and Cage is like, that's not good enough, and kicks him off the ramp.
Just kicks him off the ramp.
And it's basically it's like the gunship's
and then he walks
like
back
leaving.
Up.
It's like
but he walks back onto the ship after that, and Colonel Schaefer, who's clearly on the ship and will have known what happened,
he just doesn't care. Basically,
he just doesn't care.
He basically
they never speak about it.
He just signs the Inquisitor's death warrant, and then nobody cares.
No, it's not just that he cares. It's not that he doesn't care. The Colonel is laughing, and then he says, "How does it feel to be a hero, Cage?"
Well, I didn't realize that they were actually connected. I thought the Colonel was like not specifically like referring to that moment.
But
he was just like in the ship.
Yeah, but he had to know.
Surely he had to know.
He's had contact with the Inquisitor. Like, it's not like he has to have been coordinating with the Inquisitor because there's been the gas attacks and such to help him out, right? They met up with him again. He has to have had some sort of communication with the Inquisitor. And then he kicks the Inquisitor off the ramp as they're flying out. And Schaefer's fine with this.
It was fucked. I don't know how that fucking like fits.
Schaefer's only fine with this. He's laughing. He finds it funny.
Yeah. Just no negative sentiment.
Look at the Inquisitor. He's just going to die.
And then it's like, and then
it feel to be a hero, Cage.
Yeah, and then they leave, and it's like, ooh, I thought I saw some sort of shadow leaving quickly. And it's like, is that foreshadowing for the Inquisitor? Or is it foreshadowing for Gene Stealer? We'll find out in the next episode of the Library of Chaos podcast. Anyway.
No, we won't.
You skipped over the end. You haven't even talked about the ending yet.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no.
The reset.
So the
reset.
ending... I actually... I feel bad saying this. I actually kind of liked the ending. It was dumb.
The epilogue?
It was dumb, but it was very stylistic, and I feel like he kind of, like... I don't know if I quite want to say he stuck the landing, but like I kind of like
it was dumb, but just like reasonable enough that it kind of fit in everything else.
And it was stylized in a fun way, like the Colonel finding him hangover, like drunk, like what have I done? I'm regretting all my choices after like killing somebody immediately after, and the Colonel like there tearing up his pardon. That was your last chance. You're here with me. You're with me for good now. Something like that. I thought it was stylistically, like, it actually felt very cinematic.
No, you know what's funny? I knew you would come back to me, Cage. The Colonel purrs savagely. You are one of mine. You always will be. I can kill you now. I can give you one more last chance. Oh, frag.
It was so fucking like, it was like, okay, just dialogue aside though, the vibe he was going for with that ending was actually kind of cool, I thought. It was a proper, like, it was a considered, I'm going to end this book on an action note. It was a deliberate choice that I thought kind of worked. But
also, I'm going to end this book where it started.
Yeah, it's fine.
I mean, for some reason, right, so we missed
this book on the biggest cliche I possibly can do.
Yeah, but it's the thing is, it's such a big cliche the way it's done that it feels that didn't feel that, like, this one thing when he went so into it that it felt like it wasn't a lazy cop out doing it. It actually felt like an homage. I want to say, I feel like he pulled that off.
Yeah. I agree. It did make me wonder about one thing, though. This is like the first of many suggestions, well, including the stuff, with Colonel, like, basically forcing them through all of these scenarios on purpose. But this is like one of the suggestions that made me think that the Colonel seems to be setting, like, not even just like, it's almost like he's set up these situations. Cage, to some degree, obviously, it does seem, I imagine he probably is, like, entirely culpable for this, but, like, it's almost like it's almost like he's set up. It does feel like a bit of a setup.
Yeah. It kind of feels like an inevitability, like, almost. It's like Schaefer
it literally happens the same day, though.
Was it? I felt like the time scale was unclear.
I think he's drinking to celebrate.
Like
I think
the
he
next
does that.
day, that first day of his freedom, he was drinking and...
It was the first day of his freedom. But here's the thing, like, didn't he... I thought it said that Schaefer had his arm back when he came, because Schaefer lost his arm in the fighting and didn't...
Oh yeah, and then he says
he does. He does have his arm back.
And then, right at the end, he's got his arm back, which I thought indicated a little bit of time between the events.
It must have, actually, yeah, you're right, because Schaefer later says that it took weeks to grow back.
Yeah. So I think
that's incongruent with what Cage says, because he does seem to suggest that he's drinking to celebrate.
But that's, they're not celebrating immediately, right?
Has he been drinking like every fucking day for
maybe
months,
he's like,
for months?
Now they've actually finally, like, declared it a victory on the planet, and then he's there celebrating, right? That's how I think
about it, though. Schaefer must also have been literally in the same planet, or like literally on the planet to turn up that night. So, like, either that, he's just waiting. He's just waiting and watching Cage. Like, just waiting for the moment where Cage is going to fuck up.
I don't think about it.
He's like, the fact that he's like, I knew you would come back to me, Cage.
It's fine.
It's like, it really does tie into the whole abusive relationship angle of this.
Oh, God, yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's like massive fucking abusive relationship vibes.
It was stylistically cool, though, the way... The note
I agree.
On.
No, I like that scene.
I was going to say, given his ability to write abusive relationships, Gav Thorpe could well be the next E.L. James. If he wanted to try.
I'm going to say this.
So there was.
You know what?
Gav Thorpe is the E.L. James of Black Library.
I actually think this might be one of my favourite endings to a book in Black Library. It's definitely my favourite ending to a book out of everything Gav Thorpe has written, in spite of the book in general being awful, and like
horrifying.
Me saying, like, just in terms of like his writing ability, the first one is awful, worse than the other two, even if like we're going to have horrifying things in the next two. But in terms of writing ability, I think the first one was worse. You, I think, aren't as bothered about that as I am.
I much preferred the first book than the other two.
Well, let's get into that in a second. But out of all of Gav Thorpe's books, I feel like this one probably has the best ending, and it's probably top 5 for endings out of. I have to blank out how bad the dialogue is, but the note it ends on, I think, is maybe a top 5 from all 40k books I've read.
It's a good one. It's a good one.
Wow. Can't believe I just heard you say that.
Yeah, I that is why I prefaced this with saying I hate myself for saying it. I'm going to call it a guilty pleasure. The note it ends on is very cool.
I'm going to remind you of this.
It's edgy. It's
overdone.
Legion
is your guilty pleasure.
No. Wait. Hang on. I need to correct that. 13th Legion is not my guilty pleasure. The very last page of 13th Legion is a guilty pleasure.
Do you not think it's bad, though, that you can't...
You're going to cut it out. It's like Rich Evans saying that his favourite movie of the Halloween episode was the last 7 minutes of Rock and Roll Nightmare. Just the last 7 minutes, not the rest of it. Your favourite part is...
The favourite part of the book...
7 minutes of 13th Legion.
My favourite part of 13th Legion was when it ended on multiple levels.
Do you not think it's bad, though, that Gav Thorpe writes an actual good bit and we can't give him credit for it without saying
I'm giving credit. I am giving him credit for it. I'll give him credit for it.
But without saying it's a terribly guilty
it still has the bad dialogue and shit.
This book sold well. This book here created Gav Thorpe's writing career. He would go on to write many, many more books, and this was the beginning of it.
Hang on. Can I just
evidently he hit something.
Okay, Opium, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, there's a scene that we completely missed, which I think we have to mention because it involves something quite impressive.
What's that?
And it is another direct rip-off scene, this time from Alien.
The Gene Stealer?
Yes.
Wait, did
the
actually...
Gene Stealer turns up.
I forgot that turned up. Shit.
Cage walks into a corridor. I
forgot the fucking thing that was up the entire plot.
Yeah. So somehow Cage walks from a very occupied, very busy corridor. Suddenly he walks into the Nostromo shit in Alien, and he's suddenly in a corridor that's much darker. It's got steam hissing out of vents in the walls, and he's it's literally like night and day. It's like if you walked onto a movie set from a regular room. You just sort of turn around, suddenly you're on a movie set. That's the sort of idea I got from the scene.
Yeah.
Anyway, walking towards him through the steam and the darkness is the Gene Stealer. And it walks right up to him, opens its mouth, extends its long tongue that also has a mouth on it, and it gives it a little scream or something. I don't know what it does. Anyway, and can you remember what he does next?
Am I right in remembering that it was hypnotizing him? Because that's what Gene Stealers do. They've kind of got an ability to do a hypnotic gaze sort of thing.
I have no idea, but he goes from seeing this thing, which must look absolutely horrifying if you imagine being suddenly confronted by a xenomorph.
Yep.
Here's the thing.
He uppercuts
He's already seen them.
Yes, he's
already seen them.
He just goes man to man fighting it.
Yeah, he challenges it to a fist fight. Because nothing can be edgier than Cage, not even the xenomorph itself.
Oh.
Here's the thing, he'd fought, there's a big thing they mentioned is that the 13th Legion were involved in the Battle of Itchar 4, which was a worldwide campaign played in 40k stores, which I believe Gav Thorpe was a major author of, or at least he was involved with in some way. But I guess, that scene of him fucking uppercutting it was just... That's the sort of thing you see in a bad Aliens ripoff done by a bunch of blokes in the woods.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. And it's fucking incredible.
It's a scene that would happen under what's the word? Day as night lighting.
Day for night lighting.
Day for night lighting. That's it.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, well, the Inquisitor turns up and actually saves him, but he does knock it down with an uppercut. He knocks over a Gene Stealer by uppercutting it.
Yeah, it got nice and close. Oh my god, that's what the God Plant scene was about. It was about hardening his resilience against mind control.
Oh, maybe.
Oh my god, it all makes sense now. This is actually a work of genius.
Clearly,
he was setting everything up earlier.
Okay. All right. Okay. I think, are we done with this book?
I think we have to be at this point.
Okay. We've got Deliverance as the other story we were pairing with this before we move on out of spoilers again. I don't think there's much to talk about for Deliverance.
No, it's a really quick story.
To be honest, I
yeah,
couldn't tell you a single thing that happens in Deliverance. I've forgotten the whole thing.
That's because it's such a standard Tyranid fucking story. It just gave me some World War Z vibes, and other than that, it was pretty much it.
I've got 5 notes. So one of them is about... Okay, so Deliverance. Deliverance is famous in the 40k setting for being the homeworld moon of the Raven Guard. And... which I think is interesting because I know Gav Thorpe is a big fan of the Raven Guard. He's written a bunch of Raven Guard things. And I found it very jarring to see, like, the opening of Deliverance is basically like a dumbass native stereotype. Like, tribal I have spear. Like,
yeah.
It's like an offensive stereotype about a tribal native. And then he gets saved.
The guard.
And then he gets saved by the guard.
Let's be blunt. I suspect that this is actually a different Deliverance, or it's meant to be a different Deliverance, because it cannot be the homeworld of the Raven Guard. It cannot be.
Why would Gav Thorpe...
It's a world of natives.
Gav Thorpe, the guy who loves the Raven Guard, has written about 2 different Deliverances himself.
Yes.
That is in and of itself... What? Anyway, moving on...
That's a bit of a WTF.
Moving on from that, I've got... I don't remember what this one was. I've got a note about there's more of a dumbass teaching shit. Sage teacher versus dumbass learner.
There's an entire description about Tyranids where he goes on and on about like warriors and fighting and Tyranids.
It's not that. It's not about the learner. That's not teacher learner. That's just product catalog.
Okay, fair enough.
Schaefer.
So they
1v1's a lictor with ease.
Yeah.
Yeah. The ending had a sort of bait and switch with Cage, where he like told his squad something, and then actually it turned out he knew that what he was saying was bullshit, but he said what he needed to say, which is kind of like a cool bait and switch, but like most things in these books, it was horribly executed. Yeah,
so he tells his squad that if they don't fight, they're going to die because the spores coming down from the sky, the lights that they can see in the sky, those are Tyranid spores, and that they're going to be surrounded, that there's no way off the planet, so the only option they have is to kill or to hold the fort and save the fort against the Tyranids.
Yep.
And it turns out at the end, he tells Colonel Schaefer that what he actually saw was that they were definitely not Tyranid spores, and that they were guard drop pods, which is something only Cage could have actually understood at the time, because we aren't given enough description to really understand any of that. Mm-hmm. And Cage just basically says, I saw they were guard drop pods. I needed to tell the men, though, that they had no option, because when you have no option other than to fight better.
When you have nothing left to fight for but your life, then you will fight harder than anybody else. Something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
It's a very dumb line that gets reused a lot in the next book.
Yes, it is a theme that he uses to death. Like he bludgeon you over the head with it.
And he uses it poorly. Like the whole idea of something like that is supposed to be, when you're backed up against a wall and you're fighting for your life, then and that applies in this situation, but it gets constantly misused as if we take away everything, not if we force you to fight for your life, it's if we take away any other motivation for fighting, you then become a stronger fighter.
just purely for survival. I think that's the thing. He's trying to sell this idea that Cage like only cares about his survival, but then at the same time he keeps spinning all these weird situations where Cage does things that are definitely not in his survival interest.
Yeah, the whole...
So another even so this is the crazy thing.
That's the thing. It's not in my survival instincts, but accidentally being heroic. It's like the really, really stupid version of Caiaphas Cain.
Yeah. No, I agree.
It's like I said before. It's Caiaphas Cain, except instead of a contradiction being like a conflict of the character's personality, it's just shit writing.
Shit writing with Gav Thorpe in general.
Anyway.
So do you know you just said about him dueling the lictor one-on-one, right?
Yep.
He does that in a dress uniform because for some reason we're treated to this to like a sudden piece of knowledge that comes out of nowhere that the colonel is always in dress uniform. and I can't get why this would be the case. He's like, it seems a bit strange in general because they're usually not the most practical. They're usually based on more like showing off kind of thing. Which I'm sure the Colonel is all about because he's super fucking edgy, like everyone else. But it does seem a bit strange.
Hmm.
And that's thrown in there as almost like as a side note. And obviously it doesn't make a huge difference. I just find it kind of funny.
Yeah.
I finally remembered something about the story. It is Sisters of Battle in it. It was one of the first, probably the first time we'd seen Sisters of Battle in a book in combat.
Oh, I forgot about that. They're very briefly mentioned, aren't they? Yeah, no, there's a whole thing about it, like hearing them chanting their prayers and shit and feeling a bit inspired by it. And they're holding their own in their
they're
part.
there.
Yeah.
They're there.
Yeah.
But they're not going to follow Imperial Guard orders, but they're there.
I think it's worth noting as
do other
well.
things.
I think Deliverance was written before 13th Legion, but it's arranged in the Omnibus, and we've read it as like a prequel rather than a prelude, and I think it probably works better as a prequel than as a prelude, because it doesn't really set up characters in a meaningful way, and in fact something in there ends up being like a call forward almost, or a call back from Kill Team into it. So it makes sense to fit it there the way he uses that, even if it's used horribly.
Yeah, there's a scene in there about the Tyranids using their own dead as like a pyramid. It very much kind of reminded me of like World War Z to get over the wall. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that predates World War Z. Like literally using bodies, just pile up the bodies. That's it. Like the whole idea of Gaunts is they're there to die. They soak up ammunition. They literally exist to expend ammunition, and then you send in the bigger stuff. That's your Tyranid lore.
Nice.
Okay, I just wanted to bring up that scene was very explicitly in Starship Troopers, Verhoeven's movie in 1997.
Oh.
The bugs deliberately made a pyramid of their dead to get over the fort on Planet P.
Oh, yes. Oh, I just remembered as well. There's that section where they're like, oh, we can't see them. You need to point the lights down at the ground where they might be. And then they point the lights down and they see them. God.
Immediately.
God, that annoyed me.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I feel like a lot of that stuff is just there to show how experienced Cage is.
Yeah,
like the whole point is just like
because Deliverance is after Ikar 4, right? Jimbus?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's that experience.
So I think that's pretty much Deliverance. There's not really much else to that story.
There's nothing in Deliverance. All Deliverance is a vehicle for we watch them fight some Tyranids. Okay, they're done.
Yeah, and it gives a line.
Nobody has any character development. Nothing really happens.
And it kind of gives a bit of here's why there was that conflict at the very start of the 13th Legion. It's like a prequel to explain that. It didn't need explaining, but it does that. And then it gives a line that they then hammer you over the head with in the next book. Done. We happy with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Pretty much.
So
I think my brain stopped working.
So, with that being done, how do we rate 13th Legion? Do we recommend it?
Here's the thing. One, it sold. It sold incredibly well. It made Gav Thorpe's career. This book launched him to making many, many, many more Black Library books on big franchises. This book set him on the career that would make him a New York Times bestseller.
But 50 Shades of Grey also sold. So, do we recommend it? My answer is no.
Here's the thing.
My answer is no.
Yeah, your answer is no, but I made you read it. I suggest you didn't want to do this. You said let's go on, and the first episode will be
convinced me.
I convinced you.
You convinced me this was,
and you two have now read all three of them.
You convinced me.
I win.
You convinced me that this was relevant, and I think, as far as Black Library's history goes, I think it's relevant enough that it probably was the right call for us to read it, and I wouldn't wish to inflict it on anyone else.
Oh, I totally wouldn't wish to inflict it on anyone else. If you want to understand, if you could read these to compare them to the Gaunt's Ghosts and see the difference between Abnett and Thorpe.
Yep.
So
I would say if you have the ability to read something, to turn your mind off, to not overthink it, to not nitpick it, to simply
if you have the ability to do that, you have hundreds of other Black Library books you could go read instead of this. That is my
so as a person who said that they actually kind of liked it at the beginning, I still kind of like it, even after our discussions, obviously. Because the thing is, I do find it very difficult usually to turn my brain off and just like avoid like trying to be critical of everything about books, even when I'm reading them, even when the book is generally quite good. But in this case, I think despite everything that we've discussed, I still like the book. Now, would I recommend it? The problem is with this book is it kind of leads into the other two. And we'll get to the other two, but this, I think, is definitely the better of the three, and I definitely would not wish the other two on anyone.
Well, I'm going to say this. The other two... Okay. I feel like this book is bad enough to recommend against on its own lack of merit, but I feel like what stands out with this book compared to the other two for me, for why I didn't like it, was how poorly it was written. Like, and like, if bad prose...
That doesn't bother me that much.
If bad prose doesn't bother you, then you'll find it a lot more tolerable than I did. If you don't like bad prose, if you are going to get annoyed at like, oh, here's like, this sentence didn't flow right constantly, if you're going to get annoyed at bad dialogue, if all of this stuff is going to annoy you, you will be very annoyed at this book. If you can tolerate that for what's in the book, then I still don't recommend it, but I can see your point of view. I still think there are, like...
So now I'm going to ask you two the question. Why do you think this sold so well?
I think it sold well for the same reason that 50 Shades of Grey sold well, because some people can't discern quality. I think it sold well
because it's a 40k book in a time where people were probably playing the game and there was a lot of stuff that were not 40k books. And that they had just probably read Gaunt's Ghosts. They might have just read Space Wolf. This would have been one of the other few series, I would imagine, at the time that was coming out, surely.
And I think I know what your point of view on this one's going to be, Jimbus.
Well, my point of view is that given how incredibly well Nazi-exploitation... If Gav Thorpe sold 1% of Sven Hissell's, 15,000 copies, then that's pretty good going for an author. I think by repackaging Nazi-exploitation pulp book tropes and selling it, he was able to give himself an instant audience, because he, and lots of other kids who grew up in the 70s on these edgy, nihilistic Nazi-exploitation books who founded Warhammer, founded Games Workshop, and created the lore for the setting.
I'm sorry. So I need to know, 15,000 copies or 15 million copies? Because originally you said 15 million, then you said 15,000.
Oh, hang on,
1% of 15,000 is 150 bucks. And if they only sold 150 bucks...
I assume he meant 1% of the 15 million.
15 million. It was 15 million, so yeah.
Yes, that is a lot. That is
my
impressive.
brain is not functioning very well at the moment.
That's fine.
I've drunk an entire fifth of whiskey as we've been recording this.
I have a question for you. You said you'd read some of these old pulp Nazi exploitation things. How would you rate the quality of the writing comparing the two?
Honestly, Gav Thorpe's is about on the same level as most of them.
Well, there we go.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Trust me, as a historian, these books are just painful to read. Certainly the ones not written by Hissell, he might have served, he might not have. He gets his stuff reasonably well. But when we get to people like Leo Kessler in the lower tier, it's basically the same as Gav Thorpe.
Okay. That's interesting. Well, okay. On that note, we'll end this episode. And next up, in our next episode, we'll be looking at Kill Team and Liberty. See you next time.